name?
No. Relatively speaking. First day after the weekend. Relatively speaking. First day after the weekend. Mickelson Morley. It showed that the earth they don't move, huh? What they do, shorten the length of the ruler. Hey, that's just how they fooled ya. Tune in Wednesdays, bet that we gon' school ya. Mickelson Morley, it showed no displacement. Mickelson, Gale, Pearson, it measured rotation. Let's break it down in layman. That means the earth is stationed. No planets and spaceships, they're all animations. Relatively speaking. First day after the weekend. Relatively speaking. First day after the weekend.
In a world. What up, though? See, Drizzy finally came around. Figured out what was going on. Everyone wanted a shorter intro. There you go. I think it's awesome. It's hilarious. Using that beat in the background. Yeah. Cool. We'll play it again in a second or something, but that's the new intro. We'll make a new one for Skull and the Globers, etc. Yeah, I just like wrapped that. I like just came up with it, and you can run it through something to change it to make it sound like Drake. It's hilarious. You gotta wrap it decent to make it sound okay, but anyway. All right. So we have a lot of information to cover tonight. Yeah, so we're just going to get right into it. If you donate, Witsit.Live. It's in the description. It'll be read out loud. I think if it's over 10. And if you super chat over $19.99, then it will be read out loud. And $ WitsitGetsIt Cash App. You guys get it. All right. Like I said, we have a lot of information to cover tonight. I couldn't even put it all in there. I just didn't have time. And honestly, I think I might have put too much information in here already. We're going to take some slides from my boy Alan, Space Audits. His presentation is available in the description, so you'll know where some of these slides came from. He body bagged relativity. Donations. Okay. Changing it to $9.99. So if you donate at Witsit.Live, it gets right out loud for 10. 20 super chat. All right. Let's get straight into the presentation. Boom. All right. So what we're going to talk about tonight is the reification of time. You're going to be in Vegas in October. That's the plan. Yep. All right. Class is in session. That's correct. Let's do it. What is time? Well, time is merely the conceptual quantification of motion and change. So we see things change over time. Let me go ahead and come over here. We see people age, or we see plants grow, right? We see things happen and change. So we we think time is a real thing or it's linear. But of course, as I just showed you, actually it's not. Like, it's based on motion, which is not linear. I've covered this a few times, but it's like, oh, well, meet me tomorrow at 8. I stream Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. So we use this arrow pointing forward for the concept of time for convenience. But it is merely the motion of the sky and change. And we use these two things and call them time. So time is merely the conceptual quantification of motion and change. It is conceptual, it is abstract by definition. Okay. Henri Poincaré, I'm not saying that correct, I'm sure, but he put it best. Time and space, it is not nature which imposes them upon us. It is we who impose them upon nature because we find them convenient. Now, I did not pick out a random person to quote. This is actually the guy that Einstein stole the geometry of space-time from. He actually published it a year beforehand, actually longer than that beforehand, and refuted it himself, refuted his own idea a year before relativity was put forward. This is the guy that Einstein stole it from. The entire concept of space and time, trying to use them to explain the world or the universe, was his idea. Of course, he knew, or at the least came to the realization, it's just a concept, both space and time. Again, read it one more time. Time and space, it is not nature which imposes them upon us. It is we who impose them upon nature because we find them convenient. Henri Poincaré. And, of course, Einstein attributes physical properties to time. And he stole this guy's construct in math to do so. So what is a reification fallacy? It's from logicallyfallacious.com. When an abstraction, an abstract belief or hypothetical construct is treated as if it were a concrete, real event or physical entity. When an idea is treated as if it had a real existence. So, time being merely a concept that we impose onto the universe. Because it's actually just a conceptual quantification of motion and change. If we were to claim that they were physical or it had physical properties, that's a textbook reification fallacy. Of course, this is what Einstein did, right? Just, I think almost everyone knows this, but relativity claims that gravity is the effect of the bending and warping of space-time, which is composed of space and time. People try to say, you say space and time, but that's dishonest. That's a straw man. It's space-time, which is composed of space and time. I guess they go Super Saiyan and make a magic baby called space-time. It's comprised of space and time only. And Einstein was very clear about this. It's because you could use nothing else to explain Michelson-Morley. You had to actually remove any type of true substantive qualities. So
Russell
he picked
Gregory
out...
donated $20 through Super Chat. I hit you up on Telegram. Much love to you and your fam.
Nice. Thank you for the $20 Super Chat. I'll check my Telegram. Russell Gregory, thank you for the $20. And while we're at it... Retro Reister Gaming, always appreciate the gravy. Once again, you should flat earth mercenary and debate people's family and friends for a fee. Geocentric soldier of fortune. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I do want to try to, I guess that's an idea too. What I really want to do is like allow people to book consultations where I can kind of help break down like the basic ways to debate this or to have like a logical discussion. And people can tell me where they're having a hiccup and I can help them out. But yeah, sure. If people wanted to pay me to sit down for an hour with their family virtually, I'll make it do that. Anything that is going to help a brother pay the bills at this point. But all right, moving on. You guys get it? Relativity says that space and time are physical because it specifically says bends and warps. These are physical properties. You cannot bend love. You cannot bend freedom unless you are the world's governments the last 3 years. But in reality, of course, these are concepts: love, freedom, time, space. You cannot bend them. Make it even worse, space is a concept of nothingness. It's an absence. It's dependent upon material to be defined. It's the absence of material or energy. It's what the material and energy is within, conceptually. So it's a privation. So anyway, this is textbook reification fallacy. Moving on. This is where we're going to get a little information heavy. I can see it now. Inner World Productions or Inner World Productions. Yeah, actually, I'm flirting with etheric productions. That's what I put on that video. All right. Pound replica experiment conducted at Harvard's Jefferson Tower involved emitting photons of a precise known wavelength at both the top and bottom of a 22.5 meter tall structure. Upon measurement, the photons emitted from the top of the tower were found to have a slightly decreased wavelength at the bottom, blue shifted, while those emitted from the bottom had an increased wavelength at the top, red shifted. Okay, so what's called blue or red shift is just merely two different spectrums on the opposite ends of the spectrum of light. You have the red end of the spectrum and the blue end of the spectrum. And as something increases wavelength moving towards the red end of the spectrum, we call that redshift, or vice versa. Okay, now these are some of the main experiments, quote unquote, that are invoked to validate that time dilates. And let me actually come back over here so everyone understands. I see it's about to pop up. Sometimes I forget that maybe not everyone's fully familiar with some of this. So, just like Drizzy tried to tell you in the intro, Mickelson Morley, it showed that the Earth they don't move, huh?
Russell Gregory donated $20 through Super Chat. I'm trying to help you pay the bills, lol, but carry on, my friend. So far, so good on the stream.
Thank you, bro. Thank you, Russell, for the $20 Super Chat. So what they do, shorten the length of the ruler. They invoked length contraction. And then, they didn't have enough room for the bars, but, it showed no displacement. Michelson, Gale Pearson measured rotation. That means the Earth is stationed. How did they explain this? Time dilation. Okay. And I explained this last week a bit, but they expected a fringe shift, a displacement of the light if the Earth was orbiting around the sun. They assumed both the orbit of the Earth and the ether. And they did not get this predicted value or fringe shift, interference pattern of the waves, which are not things. That's the type of movement. Okay, so they had to find a way to explain why they didn't get the expected results. Well, in order to explain why you didn't observe one of the light beams taking longer to get to the receiver than the other one, because one's supposedly going against the motion of the Earth and one's going with it, they said, oh, the apparatus physically contracted. Can I show that? Boom. Would help him more, gang, if you sent on Cash App so YouTube doesn't get 40%. Adam, thank you for being a miswit for 8 months, bro. Legend. Yeah, or you can go to Witsit.live and donate through there, and it'll pop up on the stream, and YouTube doesn't get 30%. So I don't know why people don't consider going there, but Witsit.live. I'll drop the link. But okay, so they had to say the apparatus contracted. Now, we covered this a couple weeks ago, really last week, right? And they had to claim it contracted. Then I explained that what you have to do, claim that, is you have to also make a claim about time. Because if you say that the speed of light is constant and speed equals distance over time, then to keep the same speed, but to change the distance and contract it, you're going to have to change the time. Right? Specifically, time dilation, like when your eyes dilate, is the idea that it's getting physically wider due to the geodesic path and the bending and warping of space-time fabric. And this causes it to slow down from the perspective of the stationary observer relative to the motion, the inertial frame. Now, of course, we covered also nothing is at rest according to relativity, which is also another pseudoscientific nonsense that just kept the heliocentric model alive as it just got slaughtered by experimentation. So, to change the distance, you have to change the time. There was no experiment done. They didn't go and see that time changed. They didn't go bottle time up and change it. They didn't have any physical direct manipulation of time. That's impossible. Time's a concept, right? We just covered that. It had to change if they claimed that the apparatus contracted. So they said, the apparatus contracted, you just can't tell. Therefore, the time also slowed down. Science. Okay. So that's where time dilation comes from. You can't keep the speed the same, change the distance without changing the time. Okay, moving on. Now we're going to get into these alleged experiments they did later to verify this incredibly desperate attempts to save the heliocentric model. Okay. So again, they were at a tower at Harvard, and they quote unquote emitted photons. They knew the wavelength, and the photons emitted from the top of the tower were found to have a slightly decreased wavelength at the bottom, or they were blue shifted, while those from the bottom had an increased wavelength at the top. Okay. There are three common interpretations of the pound replica Snyder experiment results used to support relativity theory, which includes invoking the equivalence principle as support. However, the measurements don't show a need for the principle. Let's go over these interpretations. Number one, time dilation in a gravitational field. General relativity predicts that time passes more slowly in stronger gravitational fields. This time dilation effect is the result of photons emitted at the top of the tower having a slightly longer time to travel the 22.5 meter distance to the bottom than photons emitted from the bottom going to the top. Number two, gravitational redshift. According to general relativity, photons lose energy as they escape from a gravitational field. This results in a shift in a wavelength of the photons to longer wavelengths, which is called gravitational redshift. In the pound replica experiment, photons emitted from the bottom of the tower experienced a larger gravitational redshift compared to photons emitted from the top. Explanation number three, equivalence of gravitational and inertial mass. The equivalence principle states that the effects of gravity on an object are indistinguishable from those of acceleration. The pound replica experiment provides evidence for this equivalence, as the decrease in wavelength of photons emitted from the top of the tower can be seen as being equivalent to the effects of acceleration. Okay, so let's break this down to make sure everyone gets it here. Okay. So basically, the equivalence principle, they're saying, oh, well, the effects of gravity, you won't be able to tell the difference from your frame of reference of just this, the alleged effect of gravity, and gravity itself. And so just the acceleration itself will cause the same effect, and you won't be able to tell the difference. It's pretty much the same thing. You won't be able to tell. So that right there refutes the entire alleged experiment. But we're going to keep going. Number one, all photons move at c while exchanging energy and momentum with space. Photons shift their wavelengths gradually as they move through a stationary gravitational field. In drawing number one, photons with a wavelength of 1 lambda equals 1, lambda being wavelength, are emitted. They travel through the suggested gravitational field at a constant speed of c and are impacted by it, causing descending photons to gain mass, momentum, and energy from the field. And ascending photons transfer mass, momentum, and energy to the field. This is the alleged reified, made-up gravitational field of the bending and warping conceptual abstractions known as space and time. As a result, the wavelengths of the photons change gradually as they move through the field. The issue with this explanation is the lack of a well-defined physical mechanism to modify a photon's mass, momentum, or energy without altering its velocity or angular momentum. The only idea that has been proposed is the mathematical concept of a four-dimensional substance known as spacetime. This idea explains the shift in the photon's wavelength without relying on the Doppler effect, as all the photons, the source, and the observer are all in the same inertial frame, and the photons move at a constant speed of c relative to both. In short, they're saying that climbing out of the gravity well stretches the wavelength and doesn't cause the photon to lose energy. However, this invokes spacetime as a physical mechanism, a well to be climbed out of, breathing life into an otherwise mathematical concept. All right, don't worry, I got you guys. All right. So it's not just that they attribute physical properties to spacetime with this explanation. It's that they can't offer a physical mechanism, and they effectively invoke substantive physical mechanism to employ this explanation. Specifically, there cannot be substantive qualities to spacetime, or that would immediately debunk heliocentrism with Michelson-Morley. Okay, as in, if there's something with substantive qualities, substance like material, tangible, but anything that's impedance, right? Physical impedance. If there's something that causes physical impedance that has substantive qualities, then Michelson-Morley should have showed a fringe shift with the light going against the motion of the Earth. It's no secret that clocks on satellites go out of sync with Earth clocks with the predictability of Lorentz transformation formula every single time. It's actually no secret that Einsteinian synchronization didn't work for the alleged satellites, and they actually had to bring in another guy to fix it. That's what's actually known. What's actually known is that the UTC time that's standard around the world uses absolute synchronization, and so do the satellites. And that specifically, it didn't work, and they had to bring Ron Hatch in to fix the discrepancy because Einstein's synchronization didn't work. That's what's actually known. And that he had to apply more of a Lorentzian etheric theory and understanding to try to fix it. And they end up using absolute synchronization, and Einsteinian synchronization specifically didn't work. Ron Hatch, the person brought in to fix it, who actually fixed it, wrote an entire book about it called The Escape from Einstein. So that backfired. Maybe pay attention instead of trying to pretend you're teaching people in the chat with just regurgitated layman pop sci talking points. Okay. The point here is that they cannot have a real substantive background. But anyway, that's a serious problem for their paradigm. What's the law of physics that explains why we can't measure Earth curvature again? Reality. All right, moving on. I'm going to get through this information for you guys. Trust me. In drawing number 2, okay, number 2, all photons with a different velocity and none move at c. Photons acquire shifts at an observer's measurement. Okay. In drawing number 2, photons are emitted at a constant wavelength, lambda equals 1, but fall towards Earth like material bodies, causing descending photons to move faster than c and ascending photons to slow down to less than c. During their travel time, the ascending photons slowed down by this metric, and descending photons speed up By that metric, inversely, the resulting red and blue shifts in the photon's wavelength are due to their changing velocity relative to the observer. The ascending photons arrive with a velocity less than c, and the descending photons with a velocity greater than c, causing a shift in wavelength. This is their mainstream explanations. The issue with this explanation is that it contradicts the principle of the constancy of the speed of light in the relativity theory. According to the theory, the speed of light should be constant and independent of the motion of the source or observer. However, this explanation suggests that the photons in the drawing are moving at different speeds, with none moving at c relative to the source or observer, violating the principle of constancy of the speed of light in general relativity. We actually did cover that he was forced to begrudgingly denounce the constancy of velocity of light in a vacuum in general relativity, contrary to special relativity. But what apologists will say is actually it's just direction, not speed. But they're incorrect, and they don't understand that the constancy of the velocity is an outright claim, and it includes both the speed and the direction. Okay. So this obviously doesn't work. Number 3, photons acquire shifts at source and all move at c relative to an observer. Just to clarify, number 1 doesn't work. They can't even explain a physical mechanism. They basically reify their concept of relativity, attributing physical properties to space and time. And worse than that, they need a substantive physical mechanism on top of that that's undefined. What a cool story. There's a gravity well there that acts as if it's substance, but it's not substantive, and it's just concepts, but it's physical, but it's not physical because it's just concepts, but it's there, and it's substantive, but it's not substantive because if it was substantive, and then that means interacting physically, then we would have had a friendship with Michelson-Morley. So, well, here's my cake, and I'm going to keep it and eat it too. All right, number 3, photons acquire shifts at source and all move at c relative to an observer. And drawing number 3, it suggested that gravity slows clocks at the bottom of the tower, causing the emitter to take longer to produce photons with longer wavelengths, while the faster clock at the top of the tower leads to shorter time intervals and wavelengths for the emitter. Although photons move at c, observers at the top and bottom of the tower would measure their velocity differently due to varying clock rates. With equal time intervals between photons, the top emitter would produce more photons per second than the bottom emitter. The clocks do go out of sync, if you like it or not, matching exactly the magnitude of Lorentz transform. This is not a coincidence. Objectively, listen, buddy, if you just keep spamming it, you're getting on my nerves. I'm going to come over here. Listen carefully, buddy, okay? Einsteinian synchronization admittedly did not work for the discrepancies with the alleged satellites and GPS. Listen carefully, maybe research it. Einstein synchronization admittedly did not work for the GPS. They had to bring in Ron Hatch to fix the discrepancy that couldn't be fixed using Einsteinian mechanics. And they had to use a Lorentz ether theory. And Ron Hatch had to make changes to try to fix the problem. They actually use absolute synchronization on the ground, and satellites actually use absolute synchronization as well. That's what's not understood. Pay attention to where we get to the atomic clocks in a second, and you will learn something. Or just keep repeating the same dumbed down. It doesn't matter. We're moving on. It's easy to just repeat really like stupid things like you're teaching people. What can you do? All right. If you keep spamming it though and not responding to specifically that Ron Hatch had to fix it, then I'm going to time you out. I'm cool with people disagreeing, but not trolling the chat and distracting. Okay. The concept described aligns with the predictions of Einstein's relativity theory. GR explains how gravity affects the passage of time and the behavior of objects in a gravitational field. The idea that clocks at different heights in a tower run at different rates due to gravity and that observers at different positions would measure the velocity of photons differently due to their varying clock rates, supports general relativity's explanation of the relationship between gravity and the fabric of spacetime. This concept also supports the theory of special relativity, which explains that the laws of physics are the same for all observers and uniform relative motion. Special relativity predicts that time appears to run slower in a stronger gravitational field, and the velocity of light is always constant regardless of the observer's position. Wow, science. Relativity theory predicts that atomic clocks run faster at higher altitudes than at sea level. However, this can't explain the Pound-Repka results because the effect is too small. The only explanation consistent with the equivalence principle is that the clock slowing at sea level is due to the Earth's escape velocity affecting the clock's time. Using values from the drawing, the effective velocity on time dilation is calculated using the formula. That's down below. So you have the escape velocity and the speed of light in a vacuum. That relationship equaling the time. You have the bottom of the tower, top of the tower being distinctly different. The result shows that the difference in escape velocity, 0.01974, causes a small slowing of a clock, about 2.17 times 10 to the negative 21st power, much smaller than what was measured by Pound-Repka. This suggests that the effect of time dilation is too small to account for Pound-Repka's results by a factor of 1 million. Conclusion: the equivalence principle isn't measured in this experiment because its effects would be too small to perceive, so it doesn't support that claim either. Just so you know, the reason I had to put the $20 limit on there is because ballers are going to spam questions not related to the presentation. And when they do that, they are going to be ignored, even if you paid to do it. So, there you go. Try to stay on subject and not be so emotional about the fact that your religion's not real. And then I'll happily read your super chat. All right. So does everyone understand? The prediction of time dilation is way too small applying general relativity for what they actually observed in this quote-unquote experiment, Pound-Repka, which shows not only that relativity isn't a sufficient explanation, not only does it not support the claim, it actually shows something else is causing that effect that's much stronger, that specifically and expressly is not relativistic claims. It's over. There's nothing else to talk about. So this is no evidence at all for time dilation, which we already know is ridiculous in the first place because you have to baselessly reify time and then affirm the consequent. Okay. Hafel Keating, probably saying that wrong, and time dilation. The Hafel Keating experiment was an experiment in physics conducted in 1971 to test the predictions of Einstein's theory of relativity, specifically the effects of time dilation and gravitational redshift. In the experiment, atomic clocks were flown on commercial airlines around the world in opposite directions, and the times measured by the clocks were compared to a reference clock on the ground. The result of the experiment showed that the clocks that had traveled on the planes had experienced a small but measurable time dilation effect in agreement with the predictions of relativity theory. Now, this is the mainstream official claim. I fell. Okay. Let's check out who made it. Space Audits. Like I said, his entire body bag presentation of relativity is in the description. Hafel Keating, performance and results of portable clocks and aircraft, original data 1971. The original data from the Hafel Keating experiment showed that 3 of the 4 clocks were unreliable and had significant variations in their drift rates. Oh man, this is awkward. Which should have been steady in order to make accurate measurements. Table 1 shows the drift rates of the clocks before and after the eastward and westward test. Before and after in yellow, difference in red, mean in blue. Can you guys see my... Yeah, you can see. All right, let's check this out here. Eastward flight. Okay, you see the numbers. Check it out. Westward flight. Okay, now let's look at the differences. Plus 1.72, plus 5, minus 4.39, minus 1.25. Westward. Minus 2.93, minus 2.68, plus 4.31, minus 2.25. What's going on with that? I thought this proved time dilation. I thought that, let me explain and make sure everyone understands. Okay, so they claim that gravity is the bending and warping of space and time. This results in length contraction and time dilation. So as you go further away from the Earth, you're further up in the gravity well, further away from the center of mass. So you're going to be affected, your time is going to be affected differently. And as you travel east or west with or against the Earth's movement, then your relative motion will be different. Thus, which is hilarious, all of a sudden, accounting for the spin of the Earth when you're moving is important in a plane. But that your relative motion will be different based on your net angular momentum, and this will, your velocity varying will give you different results. Time dilation. Yeah. I think everyone gets that. I think everyone gets it. Let's come back over here. Stop spiraling in the chat, guys. It's making it really weird. Like, why are you guys so triggered? It's like they can't even sit here to listen to their own belief. It's weird. These are like the top sources in your paradigm. These are literally the best claimed evidences for time dilation, which has to exist if relativity is true. Jeez Louise. Yes, that's showing time dilation relativity. We agree. Oh, cool. I'm glad. I'm glad you think that. We can keep going. All right. A second. Okay. The conclusion from the data is that the huge swings in drift rates made the results of the experiment unreliable and inconclusive. So you see right here what he's saying. Why did you time me out? I didn't. I don't know what you were doing. I didn't time you out. But this was so funny. This guy here, he says, yes, it shows time dilation from relativity. and on the screen in front of everyone, like literally everyone's here and can see the screen. And it shows that the results are incredibly inconsistent in both directions. Yeah, this totally proves time dilation based on relativity. That's why the results were completely inconsistent in both directions, east and west, and in both directions, negative and positive. Science. Since our prediction didn't work at all and it wasn't consistent physical outcome that relativity predicts, that proves that it is, in fact, a physical outcome that relativity predicts. It said the owner of the channel time. It didn't say that because I didn't time anyone out. So, anyway. Like, think about how hilarious that is. Like, it's on the screen for everyone to see that the results were chaotic, erratic, and didn't work or match predictions at all. And then someone breezes right past it and says, yes, this proves time dilation based on relativity. Anyway, we're about to get into all of this in detail, by the way. The atomic clocks, I know a lot of people don't know a lot about them. So I got you. The accuracy of the clocks would have to be better by 2 orders of magnitude in order to reach a meaningful conclusion on the test. Let's read it again. Here's the data. The conclusion from the data is that the huge swings in drift rates made the results of the experiment unreliable and inconclusive. The accuracy of the clocks would have to be better by 2 orders of magnitude in order to reach a meaningful conclusion on the test. There are the results right there. Take note of the mean values, as we'll be comparing the original recorded results before and after the post-analysis and consolidation was conducted, which brings the results more in line with relativity theory's prediction. Again, make sure you check out the actual presentation in entirety down below. He also has on his channel Space Audits. You should go to Space Audits on YouTube, show my man some love, give him a sub, and then a few video backs, he has this right here. Okay. Witsit, can you address the newer versions of this experiment that have been done with higher accuracy? They haven't been done with higher accuracy, but I'm about to absolutely bury the whole thing. Right. So what you should do is just sit there and be really patient. What we should address actually is how they always moved the goalpost, right? So first, when they did the tower, people ran around and told the layman, the easily brainwashed and propagandized normie, frankly, right? This verified relativity. Come to find out, it didn't at all. It's way stronger of effect than relativity even could predict. So it's proving the opposite, which is that something else causes that effect that has nothing to do with what relativity claims. Interesting. Are you denying that the clocks on satellites go out of sync with Earth clocks? Is that your claim? No, what I'm objectively stating is that within your own paradigm, if I grant you these satellites, okay, it doesn't use Einsteinian synchronization, buddy. I'm about to bury the atomic clocks. I'm so glad you guys are chomping at the bit. It's like too easy to set you guys up nowadays. I'm just gonna be honest. I'm about to bury it. Is this your first time here? You don't know how this works yet? I'm about to bury it. The atomic clock's about to be buried. Chill out. All right. Anyway, the point I want everyone to think about in reality is when they first roll it out, they tell everyone it verifies stuff because people just repeat what they hear. Like back in the day, it would be the same people now that as soon as they read an article, they're like, proof. And they want like the most prestigious resources ever when you make a claim, which I always provide purely academic resources as hostile witnesses, right? And when I make a claim, I either preface it by, this is limited to theoretical and speculative interpretation of these experiments that it's built upon, certain aspects can't be directly manipulated, or here's the experimental empirical evidence verifying what I say. They always do the opposite. I have to go bring up hostile witnesses to show them what their own position says. They then scream and cry about how the person I invoked doesn't believe in flat Earth. Yeah, I know. I'm having to correct you on your own belief. And that's why the propaganda of the heliocentric model has worked so well. Because you don't really have to tell the truth. You just have to lie. Just like baselessly claim victory, claim that the theories and the model have been verified, and you will have people running around on the internet nowadays pretending that they know that's true. That's all you have to do. They don't understand it. They don't research it. They just repeat things. So they did that with the drop tower, right? And they do this here. And when it's drop tower where they're emitting and shooting the photon, I mean, let's not get too sidetracked. That's merely pseudoscientific nonsense and reification fallacies where they say that it's actually a massless particle, when in reality, it's nothing more than a process. The photon is the intersection of an oscillating electric and an oscillating magnetic field. It's an event. It's a process. It's where the two oscillating fields intersect. There is no physical entity of a particle called a photon. That's pseudoscientific nonsense. But even granting them that, the result is way too much for relativity. Okay, so that doesn't only show that it doesn't support relativity. It shows that effect happens because of something else, and it strictly cannot be because of relativity, which is hysterical. So same thing with the planes, by the way. So just pump your brakes here. All right. Anyway, so when they came out with this in 71, everyone acted like it was verification of relativity. People still bring up this test as if it's verification, but once we get to the paper, which you would never get the data from any of the people running around and claiming it verified, the theory of relativity in that time is some physical entity that physically expands called dilation, thus slows down. And if you go the speed of light, then you would experience timelessness. That's scientific. The people that go around claiming that and they say, satellites prove relativity. Oh, what about atomic clocks? They just remember like catchphrases. They've never looked at it. They never looked at the data, right? So once we find it now, what do? They shift the goalpost over to, what about the more up-to-date ones that did better? Just baselessly assuming that there are new ones done that don't have the same problems as this test, but that's how you know that they're ignorant. Right? Because that's not true. And we're about to get into it. So it may sound like I'm ranting a bit, but this is very important to understand. You have to understand what you're going to deal with. People will baselessly lie. So when they say, what about the new tests that have been done that have been way more accurate and way more successful? That's just a baseless claim, but they have the confidence that science always gets better, the test and technology gets better, thus it must have verified their position more so by now. It's a safe position to always just baselessly call out to the idea of advancement with no articulatable specificity of substance. Write it down. Ballas. All right, let's move on. So as you see here, it clearly doesn't work at all. It's going in the wrong direction in both directions. It's completely erratic. Yet it's run around and tout it as if somehow verification that a concept is physical. All right, here we go. Okay. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence and interpretations of the Hafel, I'm going to say it like that every time, Keating experiment is anything but extraordinary evidence. You can approach the results of the experiment from various angles to show the so-called relativistic effects attributed to it can be accounted within the confines of natural processes. Time dilation is a physical effect of various factors, which I will list now. Of course, this is things we use to conceptually represent time, things that we use to allegedly quantify the conceptual abstraction that is time, which again is just a conceptual quantification of change in motion. I'm going to try not to start going really fast. I know this is information heavy. Some of you guys are here to actually learn, and then the zealots are not in here to learn. Evidence of that is that they're constantly typing non sequiturs. Okay, time dilation is a physical effect of various factors, which I will list now. Electromagnetic retardation. Oh, the joke was tempting. Changes to the medium in which light is traveling, electric or magnetic. Now, light doesn't actually travel, it's an excitation, and then the speed of light is nothing more than a rate of induction based on the perturbation or disturbance that is visible light or illumination. But it's okay. The medium will, of course, change our quantification processes that we call time. Motion can cause the atomic clocks to become out of sync. Even stationary in a lab setting, they drift out of sync. It just happens faster when you move them around. Now, some people don't want to learn. They just want to protect their paradigm. This is for people that want to pull back the curtain. Okay. Moving the devices. The clocks were transferred on and off plane 6 times. By the way, this is not a very replicated test. Okay. You're asking to debate me? You can come on my show if you show your face. I'll open it up for the ballers. You have to show your face, though. All right. The data was actually changed to fit the relativistic predictions of quote-unquote time dilation. That's how you know it's science, is that it can be explained by tons of other real verifiable physical things, and you ignored all of those. Ignored the fact they get out of sync stationary, but more frequently in motion. Then continually moved the devices in addition to the motion of the planes, on and off the planes. Couldn't even get them entirely synchronized in the first place, and then moved them after that. Then you had to actually alter and change the data to get closer to fitting the relativistic predictions of quote-unquote time dilation, which of course is just begging the question reification fallacy at this point. The prediction itself is extremely small and could be attributed to other factors. It's an incredibly small amount of alleged time that's measured. With all of that taken into consideration, no, with the way your behavior is, there's no like formal debate. Like, I'll open up the phone lines on my channel. Come on, with like 10 different ballers. You can all debate me 10v1. That's what the people want to see anyway. No interruptions, no cussing, no excessive ad homs or fallacies. With all of that taken into consideration, supposedly only one clock gave a decent reading and had a predicted drift in line with their predictions. Oh, this is another case of them tactically omitting the truth. This is just like the 1919 Eddington experiment that people claim actually verified that the gravity was bending light around an eclipse so we could see a star behind the sun. What they don't tell you is that there were 35 plates and only 2 of the plates even got a reading remotely close to relativity, and they still had to mess with the data, and the plates, the photographic plates used, weren't sensitive enough to actually detect even the value they were looking for. Then Eddington himself said this is a real problem for relativity, and they had to change it. Only 2 of the 35 plates in the Eddington experiment even got close to showing the predicted value of relativity. And it still didn't, and still had to be altered. 2 of 35, and it still, those 2 didn't work. And people run around to this day claiming that the first proof of relativity was that they saw a star bend around the sun based on the prediction of relativity, which is not verified, mind you. It's to this day. It's not like we go see this happen a lot, but people will blindly believe that they do. This is a perfect example of that. Same thing here. Everything that this model requires. Now, mind you, the Earth's a tilted, wobbling, spinning ball revolving around the sun in a vacuum, and science has known this for hundreds or thousands of years, and we know that the Earth is orbiting the sun, and we have all kinds of incredible science, and we know that space and time bend and warp, even though the highest levels of academia openly admit that relativity is incomplete, best case scenario, drastically incomplete, but pretty clearly wrong, and we'll have to move on from it. And there's no way that it's correct. It doesn't work on the quantum or cosmological scale, and even has discrepancies on the local scale. But no, the layman will run around and pretend that relativity is legit. And the point is that if you exclude everything that goes straight in the face of it, and then you hand select a couple of reification fallacies, that's all you have. And then you believe that verifies relativity. Brother, I got a bridge to sell you, like, go for it. Weird to me, but I do realize that most people don't know any of this. This is the best evidence. Literally, this is a still man presentation. This is not a straw man at all. It's in fact the best alleged evidence that exists. Okay. This is required to exist, of course, if Einstein's correct. Thus, the heliocentric model. With all that taken into consideration, supposedly only one clock gave a decent reading and had a predicted drift in line with the predictions. It's presumptuous to say that time is affected rather than the physical mechanism of the devices used is falling out of sync due to natural phenomena. Now, mind you, of course that's what's happening, because we're going to look here. It goes out of sync in both directions. So when it's flying east and when it's flying west, it comes out of sync in both directions. And only one of the clocks got even kind of close to the alleged prediction, and that's after they applied corrections to it. They can only get one to allegedly be close after applying corrections. And they go in both directions in both directions. Science. To put it into perspective, to believe that Hafel Keating supports relativistic time dilation, then you must also believe that a man who lives on top of a mountain lives slightly in the future than someone who lives at sea level, despite there being no way to quantify that. I'll leave a link to sources below, and you can divide into the technical aspects of the experiment and interpret them for yourself and pick your own conclusion. There are many to choose from. Okay. Examining the 3 interpretations of the experiments that are put forward as proof of relativity. Although the published works of the men who conducted the Pound-Repka and Pound-Snyder experiments explicitly state that the results cannot distinguish between frequency shift caused by supposed gravitational redshift, in which the photons would be altered by the curvature of space-time as they climb out of Earth's gravity well, or if a velocity shift caused by the photons experiencing a downward acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared, which is just a rough average, a quantification of the effect, where people then conflate the actual causation and the effect of 9.8 meters per second squared as the... I shouldn't have... Let me interrupt. Sorry. Okay. So I know it's a lot of information. So even though they themselves who did the test admit they cannot distinguish between the frequency shifts caused by supposed gravitational redshift, in which the photons would be altered by the curvature of space-time as they climb out of this gravity well, or if a velocity shift caused by the photons experiencing a downward acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared as the photons travel from the top of the tower to the bottom. In the same respect, the photons traveling from the top to the bottom lost speed in accordance with overcoming a downward force of 9.8 meters per second squared. Basically, the people that did the test themselves admit, well, we can't actually distinguish in any way that it's actually caused by anything that we're assuming. We can't even tell which one of these two it is that we're isolating in the first place to then make the presupposed interpretation of. So we will examine the author's arguments regarding 3 of the most common interpretations of the experiments that attempt to show the support for relativity theory. They can't even agree on the interpretation nor the physical mechanism. That's how you know it's been scientifically proven with atomic clocks. Number 1, time dilation in a gravitational field. General relativity predicts that time passes more slowly in stronger gravitational fields. This time dilation effect is the result of photons emitted at the top of the tower having a slightly longer time to travel the 22.5 meter distance to the bottom than photons emitted from the bottom going to the top. Number 2, gravitational redshift. According to general relativity, photons lose energy as they escape from a gravitational field. This results in a shift in the wavelength of the photons to longer wavelengths, which is called gravitational redshift. In the Pound-Repka experiment, photons emitted from the bottom of the tower experienced a larger gravitational redshift compared to photons emitted from the top. Number 3, equivalence of gravitational and inertial mass. The equivalence principle states that the effects of gravity on an object are indistinguishable from those of acceleration. The Pound-Repka experiment provides evidence for this equivalence, as the decrease in wavelength of photons emitted from the top of the tower can be seen as being equivalent to the effects of acceleration. Now, this is where I jump. Now, we buried all those already anyway. I must have left out one of the slides, which is where they point blank are quoted admitting they can't tell the difference. Okay, now here is where we're going to pull back the curtain. Yeah. So let me come over here and chill with you guys for a second. Still waiting for your explanation of how atomic clocks don't work according to your claim. I'm about to teach you about atomic clocks, bro. Like, you 100% don't even know how they work. But it's all good. You know, that's how it goes. I'm going to teach you, bro. It's all good. It's all love. So, I know that, like I told you guys, this is an information-heavy stream. If you want to kind of look through that, you can either watch Alan go through it on his channel, Space Audits. Go show him some love and sub. You can also get access to the file itself in the description through his Telegram. All right. Now, I know this is like information heavy. Some people are like, oh, it's nerdy. It's too much. If you can really familiarize yourself with some of the base tenets here, this is the best they have at all for the claim that time dilates. Okay. It's very important because this is what saved them out of the irrefutable evidence that the Earth was not orbiting around the sun. Just the direct refutation. So they had to make insane, like pseudoscientific, unfalsifiable claims. Space and time, two concepts come together, make a Super Saiyan baby. They go Super Saiyan, become space-time, and then they can defy all physics and have physical properties, even though they're concepts and their abstractions. Space and time We can't isolate them. We can't find them. They're just concepts. If we all get together tomorrow and change 1 minute to 30 seconds, it changes because time's not actual physical reality. It's just a concept. And space, which is just linked with height, how we describe things that we quote unquote measure, because math describes things. I can't hand you a length. I can hand you a 2x4 that has a length. I can't hand you a length. Space is conceptual. If you see the In the Field where I talked to Professor Parks, he tried to say that a book was space. I said, no, the book is in space. He said, well, the book has length with, yeah, it's taking up quote unquote space. That proves my point. This is a physical, material, and tangible book. It's not space. He didn't have an answer for that. If you want to stump any physicist, professor, you name them, just ask them, how can you attribute physical properties to the conceptual abstractions of space and time? They'll say, nah, that's not what they are. Then you just say space linked with height. You can only describe real physical things with those attributes. They cannot have properties, specifically physical ones. All right, now we're going to get into what atomic clocks are. All right. I would really appreciate it. I try to be very patient with the ballers in here. That's fine. You're welcome. But I need you to pay attention, please. If you're spamming the chats with things irrelevant, just talking crazy about me, and just trying to come at all the people in the chat, talk about, I shouldn't see, the flat earth should have no horizon. Like, please go talk to some people on Facebook with your 2015 nonsense. We're talking about time dilation, okay? Just try to pay attention. Okay. What is an atomic clock? There are two types of atomic clocks, one which uses quartz crystal and one which uses cesium. The atomic clocks using quote-unquote cesium-133 atoms are much more precise as they utilize the consistent frequency of cesium. Okay, so when we're talking about these supposed time dilation claims certain in modern times, it's always a cesium. Now, your clock will use like a quartz crystal because there's an oscillation within that quartz crystal, and it's able to quantify time based on the oscillation. Okay, but those are subject to change. Not all crystals are the same, and they're much less precise. All right. So they're using the consistent frequency of cesium, right? Now, we'll get into maybe in the future, like what even is an atom? What are these alleged elements? But that's not for this stream. Let's talk about how they work. Step 1. A beam of cesium atoms, quote unquote. Ballers, calm down. Just need to pay attention, please. Step 1. A beam of cesium atoms, quote unquote, which is just pseudoscientific reification, is directed through a magnetic field, causing the quote unquote atoms to split into two groups with different spin. Simply one group has atoms spinning one direction, and the other group of quote unquote atoms spin the opposite direction. Disclaimer, every time I use the word atom, this is their story. Atoms in the atomic model is just a conceptual abstraction needed for materialism, and it's impossible to quantify the immaterial. They had to name things comprised of little particles to try to count them, and as their model consistently was not correct, they just changed it over and over to where now there's tons of subatomic particles, but you can never actually function or find them, and they have the intrinsically just ridiculous, insane claim of wave function collapse and wave particle duality. Okay, that's not what this is about. So, simply, they shoot these quote-unquote cesium atoms in a quote-unquote beam, and it's directed through a magnetic field. And this causes the atoms to split into two different groups. One spins one direction, one spins the other direction, in really crude layman terms. Now, they've updated a lot of their explanations. They used to claim that they spin in their orbitals, and now they kind of use the same terms but change. And it seems like the subatomic particles that they call spin oftentimes is just vibration. And then a specific type of vibration or radius of vibration, and they call it different types of spin. They quantify that alleged spin or angular momentum within the presupposed motion. But it's measured and detected motion, but presupposed interpretation of the model. Now, the point is that they shoot the cesium through the magnetic field. It splits them up based on which one's moving which direction. Now, of course, you have the vortex, the antivortex, centrifugal divergence, centripetal convergence in the magnetic field, but we'll cover that maybe Wednesday. Okay, that's step one. They shoot the cesium atoms through a magnetic field, which splits them up. Splits them up in two different groups based on their spin. Step two, the two groups of atoms are then exposed to microwave radiation. This is what happens inside the atomic clocks, just so everyone's on the same page here. Maximus, you're really, really close to getting timed out, brother. Step two, the two groups of atoms are then exposed to microwave radiation. A very particular frequency is used to cause the atoms to flip their spin state and move from one group to the other. So again, we have two different groups, two different spins, which is, of course, the quantification of angular momentum. Okay, this is how the atomic clock works. Oh, missed 3 or maybe just misnumbered it. Okay. Next step, the atoms then pass through a region within the clock that measures their spin state. It detects the number of atoms, quote unquote, that have changed their spin state. Okay, so it detects which ones change from one state to the other, right? So basically go from one group to the other. The microwave frequency adjusts relative to the amount of atoms that change states. And this is how it supposedly maintains accuracy. Okay, the unit of a second is defined as an insanely big number. 9,192,631,770 quote-unquote ticks, or changes in state of energy. Now, this is how they use the atomic clocks to keep time. The cesium has a pretty consistent frequency, a very specific oscillation rates, a very specific frequency of microwaves affect the states of the angular momentum of the vibration. It's a very somewhat stable, so very somewhat, it's somewhat stable. Like, in intents and purposes, they use it because it's pretty stable, okay? And so the way that they quantify a second is that there's 9 billion changes in these quote-unquote atoms per second, roughly, based on the oscillation rate, the frequency of the
I bet you know this is the
cesium.
legend of sales. You were on tour. Lay out detailed plans for experiments. Pay salespersons 10% of donations sold towards experiment. Hope all subs donate is like socialism. Think about it. Respect what you do. Don't stop.
Thank you. Mate, was that a donation? Thank you so much. I'll read you off just because I didn't have the alert box on top of the PowerPoint. Don't want to miss you. Hopefully this is making sense, but don't worry. I made it a point to really try to lay this out where everyone understands it. Let me find this real fast. Wish I had the initial music. I'd just play that. Oh, yeah, you. All right, I think I found it. Okay, Andy, thank you for the $25 donation on Witsit.live, brother. I think I talked through you. I'm going to read it. I bet you know this as the Legend of Cells. You were on tour. Lay out detailed plans for experiments. Pay salesperson 10% of donations sold towards experiment. Hope all subs donate is like socialism. Think about it. Respect what you do, don't stop. Thank you so much for the kind words, the idea suggested, and the donation, brother. Much love. All right. Now, so the way that they quantify the second is based on this 9 billion number of quote unquote ticks or oscillations, right? Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. All right. Atomic clocks make very precise measurements with a form of interferometry called microwave resonance spectroscopy. It's funny how they desperately had to run from the results of interferometry, right? But they use it to then try to support time dilation. It's hilarious. Hey, flat earth denier. You got one warning. You come in here just talking about a whole bunch of irrelevant subjects, not about the presentation, and spam in the chat. You're going to get timed up. Or eventually wrong saloon. Okay. We're talking about time dilation. Pay attention. This place is not for you to come spam your nonsense, please. Thank you. Very simple rule here. Be respectful and just be on subject. I don't know why it's so difficult. All right. So they use interferometry, a specific kind called microwave resonance spectroscopy, right? Interferometry using lasers nowadays, of course. And this is how they measure the oscillations. And has a certain amount of times it basically moves or has changes in the state of energy. And basically it's actually vibration. Okay, moving on. Dude, Maximus, you think you need to pay attention, okay? Atomic clocks have an accuracy of plus or minus 3 times 10 to the negative 13 seconds. That's point. Lots of zeros, 3 seconds. Yeah. Pay attention, buddy. Okay. Here's a simplified overview. Cesium, quote unquote, atoms are prepared in a particular state by heating them in an oven and then passing them through a magnetic field, which separates them based on their spin. Then they pass the quote unquote atoms through a microwave cavity, exposing them to microwave radiation of a very specific frequency. This microwave frequency makes the atoms oscillate between energy states. Makes them go back and forth between the two because a very specific frequency interacts with the frequency of the cesium. Okay? So they get them in a certain state by warming them up, heating them up in an oven, passing them through a magnetic field, which separates them because of the polarity of the magnetic field based on the spin, quote unquote, the vibrational or angular momentum. They're separated within this magnetic field. Okay. And then they expose them to a very specific type of microwave radiation at a very specific frequency, and that makes them change. Then they try to quantify it. These energy states are quantum definitions quantifying angular momentum. This all requires an immense amount of reification, so bear with me. And that's where I'm going to come over here and try to explain to you. Okay. So you have the quote-unquote atom. We'll bury that later. I did just do a dope podcast with Caleb and Derek. Caleb is in the chat if you want to drop the link to your podcast. We buried atomism. We talked about atomism there. But simply put, you have this. You have different characteristics of what they call particles. Spin, momentum. Okay, and spin is really angular momentum, but when you really break it down, it's like vibration almost every time that they're saying it's spin. But just terms, and they keep the same terms from a long time ago, like orbitals. They used to actually think, right, that the atom had like orbits, like planets, like a solar system. And they don't think that anymore. They think it's a cloud of probability distribution because they know it can be all over the place, not just in a consistent orbit. But anyway, and it, of course, is the reify of the electron, which we don't have time to go into. So the point is, you have the quote-unquote atom, right? So you have spin of that, which is comprised of basically the net of all the subatomic particles spinning inside of them. So it's net vibrational resonance based on what this quote-unquote atom is comprised of. Of course, in reality, it's all like etheric and energetic, and so there's an intrinsic vibrational resonance because, in fact, for you to even have energy, right, I would define energy as etheric vibrational displacement. right? And in modern times, they define energy as ability to do work. It's an ability. Like humans are the ability to breathe. It's an etheric vibrational displacement, right? That's what it is. It's actually the product of pressure mediation. What we call energy is actually basically the loss of dielectricity. It's like trying to get back to the pure energy or pure potential, as we call it, which is the inertial state, which is the initial state, which is the ether. Okay, anyway, just so you understand, they claim that there's spin of the atoms, and that's comprised of subatomic particles, which have different spins. Okay, so there's different characteristics for all these subatomic particles and for these different atoms. Just so you kind of understand there's a distinction there. I said, bear with me, it's just flooded in reification. We don't have time to go to bury all of atomism. Okay. After passing through the microwave field, they are then passed through another magnetic field, which again separates them based upon their spin. They are then detected with interferometry and counted, divvied out based on their oscillation. Then is what is called the feedback loop. The previous measurement is used to adjust the microwave field to keep it tuned at just the right frequency, thus ensuring the atomic clocks stay accurate. This is what's so funny, right? People that don't know anything about it, they're like in the chat, like ridiculing people, like the atomic clock's so precise, ha 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 ha, it proves gravity. They don't know how it works though. Okay? And so this is the important part. Okay, this is the very important part. So then what is called the feedback loop, the previous measurement is used to adjust the microwave field to keep it tuned at just the right frequency, thus ensuring the atomic clocks, quote unquote, stay accurate. And there you have it, the silver bullet. These clocks are in a constant state of adjustment utilizing microwave radiation and magnetism. They change the actual frequency based on the results. If they're not what's expected, they just change it. So if there's some type of energetic change within the environment, they're accounting for it by actually altering the frequency and attempting to basically cook the books, right? Like eliminate the most prominent variables, which of course microwave, that's the light spectrum, intrinsically electric and magnetic, EMR, electromagnetic radiation, right? There are no photons. It's just the event or process, the oscillating electric field and magnetic field intersecting. And then they're using magnetic fields to actually cause an alteration within the excitation that is light, which is a huge spectrum of electromagnetic radiation, including microwaves. Okay, so they're literally using electromagnetic frequencies to manipulate the quote-unquote cesium atom, the cesium, and then they're running that through a magnetic field. And then when it doesn't match their presupposed quantification method, they change, and it's the clock itself is designed to do this, changes its frequency based on the amount of oscillations it detected, the number of certain states of energy or oscillations, so that they can actually change it. That's not what it means. You don't know what you're talking about. You're about to be just timed out. Because I know exactly what I'm talking about, and you don't, right? You're just here. Your name says it all, right? So, and this is just subjective. I'm gonna come over here. This is a fact, okay? The atomic clocks, they don't know anything about this. It's okay, just ignore them. They're like really religious, you know. Just bear with them. They don't know their belief, but they have to pretend they do. So it's like this, feel bad for them. Feel bad for people. And if you're watching this and you're in that state of mind, like you should really step back and think about that, right? That's sad. That's not good for your soul or your spirit to be like that. So show evidence they changed to fit their predictions. If it's in the basic blueprints of how atomic clocks work, you don't even know how they work. That's what's so funny, right? Of course, this dude is a flat earth denier. He's a clown, right? So he's going in here pretending to brag about the consistency and accuracy of atomic clocks and taunt people for it, but he doesn't even know the basic way that they work. So here's how they work, okay? We broke it down. I broke it down in two different ways. One, a really simplified way, okay? But whenever the amount of atoms, right, the energy states don't match the amount that it should, meaning the oscillations and the different groups don't match the 9 billion number per second. When they break them up in these groups and they don't have the right ratio and there's not the right amount of certain atoms oscillating a certain way, right, which is the two groups that are basically different angular momentums, then the clock is designed to slightly change the frequency as it needs to ensure accuracy. That's fundamentally how they work. Fundamentally. Okay? They don't know that, though, because that's not on, like, I don't know, like sci-fi.com or whatever, right? But you guys get it. Okay. So that is a huge part of this atomic clock idea, right? Okay. So they used magnetism to change the intrinsic vibrational resonance of the reified atoms and then group them based upon the angular momentum or direction. Taking this to different altitudes within the Earth's magnetic field and traveling in different directions within the vortex motion around a stationary Earth would assuredly cause a change. This is entirely ignored and left unaccounted for completely in a desperate attempt to reify time for relativity's sake. See, this is why the ballers can't stand the arguments that come here, because if the effect is real, it's only evidence for a stationary Earth. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, you never heard a flat earther say that one before. Okay. See if you can rebut it. So they don't even account for the magnetic field. Now, I just broke down for you the actual way that the atomic clocks work. Okay? Now, if people are denying in the chat, they're irrelevant, right? Like, the atomic clocks work a certain way. That's how they work. They use the oscillation of cesium. They use microwave radiation. They use magnetic fields. They split them up. They change the microwave radiation to a very specific frequency based on the actual measured outcome with a specific type of microwave spectroscopy interferometry. Okay? So they're making very precise measurements with interferometry. They're checking out the oscillation of this cesium, and then they're splitting it up, and then they're sending it through magnetic fields, which spins them, which basically alters them or changes their energy state. And so they're able to divide them up, and they should basically be flipping them over with the magnetic fields. They keep running it through it. It should be really consistent because overall cesium has a pretty consistent frequency. That's why they use it, because of its oscillation consistency. But it's not perfect, and that's why they have to heat them in the first place to try to get them to a more consistent frequency, blah, blah, blah. The point is, it's all magnetic. All of it, because microwaves, again, right? That's within the spectrum of light. Light isn't just visible light, okay? So even with visible light, you have the photon being, in reality, the oscillating magnetic field and the oscillating electric field. They intersect. Where they intersect, they call that a photon. That's actually an event. It's a process. It's an intersection. It's not a physical, corporeal entity. There's no physical particle called a photon. It's just where the electric and magnetic field intersects. Now, people will probably deny that in here, but I was talking to a PhD quantum physicist on YouTube, literally, and when I explained that, he jumped in so fast to say, that's what quantum field theory says. That's what most people believe it is anyway. I'm like, okay, good. You guys are coming around, and I know many quantum physicists that acknowledge that, although they wouldn't have a few years ago, and the average person will never actually acknowledge that. But in reality, that's what it is. Now, that's we're talking about visible light. You have also the non-visible spectrum, but it's all light. It's electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic, electric oscillating field. So there's an oscillating electric field and an oscillating magnetic field. They intersect. Okay? They have different frequencies based on which part of the spectrum that they're in. They're sending microwaves, right, which we covered. That's 300 megahertz to 300 gigahertz. That's the range of microwave. They're sending very particular microwave frequencies electromagnetic frequencies to the cesium, at the cesium, right? They're hitting it with a certain microwave frequency to alter it. Okay? And they run them through magnetic fields, which are coherent. They have polarity, right? Quote unquote. And which means you have the vortex and the anti-vortex. Just look up vortex, anti-vortex, magnetic field, right? Although modern academia can't really define it, they're coming around like 2021, 2022 papers that'll show you very precise experiments with like revolutionary technology showing, oh, there's a vortex and an anti-vortex in the magnetic field. And of course there is, right? And there's centrifugal divergence and centripetal convergence. The hyperboloid, the toroid overlap. The point is, they're using that polarity, the two different motions, the conjugate geometric expression, two types of motion to spin the other motion, basically align it with whichever one of the frequencies aligns with a certain portion of the magnetic field, thus it moves that way. So wherever it interacts within its oscillation, that's with the magnetic field, that's which way it's going to go. Okay? It's going to be able to change them basically. Okay? So if it has a certain measured angular momentum, but then it intersects with the magnetic field with a certain oscillation, it'll go the other way. They use this, they divide it up, and it's a very precise method of trying to quantify quote-unquote time, which is a concept. So that's why they came up with this base frequency that seems to be one of the most reliable, and they said, oh, it's like 9 billion something per second. Okay, now, when it doesn't match, right, they use that rate, that number, that standard, and the clock itself is designed to change the frequency to change it. Okay, it's all magnetic. Now, here's the point. I saw that again because people aren't necessarily listening, okay? But this is the part, right? If you take these atomic clocks, and now they can't even fully synchronize them, and they actually fall out of synchronization on the Earth, much less in motion. If you move them, they'll be unsynchronized. If you put them in a plane, for sure, if you move them on and off the plane, they become out of synchronization stationary on the surface of the Earth. Okay, that's reality. And they have to, it's known based on the base mechanism of atomic clocks, how they're actually designed, which you'll never hear any like time dilation, relativistic proponent ever mention the actual mechanism of how the clock works. You'll never hear it. Hence, that's why this show exists. I have to get into all the weeds, talk about all these, because you'll never hear it. They don't know. They just know how to repeat the misrepresented conclusion over and over. If you take this, right, which again, they don't actually remain synchronized. Let's put that on the shelf for a second. If you take it, right, knowing what we now know about how it works, and you go higher on the Earth, what are you doing? You're going higher in a magnetic field of Earth, right? So you're going to a different altitude within the magnetic field of the Earth. If you go east or west, what are you doing on a stationary plane Earth? Even if it's not a plane in your deluded belief. Either situation, stationary Earth. You have the angular momentum of the cosmos moving in relation to the Earth. According to the covariance and equivalence principle of relativity itself, you would have to acknowledge that you would get this same effect on a stationary Earth, the same effect attributed to the directional bias of motion of the Earth, right? Which is one of the explanations we covered earlier. If you understand the covariance and equivalence principle of relativity, you have to say that you would get that same effect on a stationary Earth. Now, the Earth's a plane. It's stationary, okay? There's a vortex. So you're going higher up in a vortex, a literal vortex, because you can't have magnetic fields without inertial planes or block domain walls. That's what the mainstream calls it, block domain wall. It's a plane of inertia, okay? And then you have a vortex. So you're moving in relation to this vortex. So what would be super interesting is to do this test with incredibly precise measurements and like extreme accuracy at all kinds of different latitudes and altitudes. Guess what? You're going to be really hard pressed to find that. That didn't happen. They don't do that. This is not a very frequently done test because they know it's actually very shoddy evidence at best. It's just for the layman to run around and repeat as if it's actual evidence. Okay. The point is, in conclusion, of course you would get an effect with an atomic clock on a stationary Earth within a magnetic field, because we know that this effect can be caused by electromagnetic retardation. Okay. And we know that there's precession, right? Gyroelectric precession, gyromagnetic precession, right? And we know that there's a vortex movement effectively, which is what that is. Okay. And you're going at different altitudes within the field. So if you're moving in different directions within different altitudes, what they've done, as always, is hijack the electromagnetic nature, which is where they got length contraction in the first place, as Oliver Heaviside showed, that wires can contract based on electrical currents. That's where the idea came from in the first place. That's where Lorentz got it. But then he opposed it to all material from the ether itself to try to save the heliocentric model in respect to Michelson-Morley. Einstein stole that idea. It's all built upon a real electric phenomenon. Lorentz stole it, applied it to all matter equally, said, I have no idea how this could even work. Why would it affect all matter equally? That's ridiculous. I can't even give you a real physical mechanism other than the ether must have done it. That's the only way we can explain Michelson-Morley without the Earth being stationary. If not, the Earth is stationary. There's no way around it. Einstein comes in, takes that, doesn't even offer a physical mechanism at all, right? And then claims length contraction, is then forced to claim time dilation. Using the same geometry, which, by the way, specifically we've covered, is from a guy who pointed out very handedly, who came up with everything, space-time. And it's just a concept that we imposed onto the universe. Okay, hopefully that helped put some pieces together for you guys. This is a hijacking of electromagnetic phenomena, best case scenario, and it's super shoddy, super, like the amount that they're claiming to measure is insane, super inconsistent. Every single one of the modern attempts and everything, most of them don't work. There's tons of error. It's incredibly hard to synchronize. That's why they don't even really do it much. There you go. It's an oscillation of season. It's intrinsically electromagnetic as it's in a different portion of the electromagnetic field. Oh, we won't even account for electromagnetism at all whatsoever. But we know that we answered it. It's so weird. Okay. All right. Now, here's another portion from my boy Alan's presentation. So here's Ken Wheeler on electromagnetic retardation. You see the ferrule cell to the right. Ken Wheeler demonstrating magnetism as a physical mechanism for phase shift in light and the effects of relative motion. When light travels through a medium with a refractive index different from air or vacuum, it can experience electromagnetic retardation, which is caused by the interaction of the light with the electric and magnetic fields of the medium. This can lead to a change in the wavelength of the light, resulting in a phase shift. It's almost like they specifically adopted a coordinate system without an ether, so they could attribute etheric effects to the coordinate system. That's super goofy. The Zeeman effect and the star effect, electromagnetic retardation due to magnetism or electricity, respectively. Correct. It's so funny, too, because... All right, Flat Earth Denier, you're banned. You're banned. So, I'll do it. He's talking about my kid, so he's banned. Okay. What a moral degenerate. All right. So when light travels through a medium with a refractive index different from air or vacuum, it can experience EM retardation, which is caused by the interaction of the light with the electric and magnetic fields of the medium. Light, in fact, is nothing more than excitation of the background medium, and it actually manifests as oscillating electric and magnetic fields. All right. So this can lead to a change in the wavelength of the light, resulting in phase shift. When a magnet is placed over a ferrocell, the EM field created by the magnet causes a phase shift in light passing through the ferrocell. The LED lights around the ferrocell split into a red shift and blue shift at opposing sides of the magnet's quote-unquote north and south pole, with the north pole producing a red shift and the south pole producing a blue shift. Moving the ferrocell over the magnet changes the polarity, causing the North Pole to produce a blue shift and the South Pole to produce a red shift. And this is actually types of motion. You have clockwise and counterclockwise. This is a very important distinction because space-time has no refractive index. The mechanism by which general relativity claims phase shift is induced is because of an object's gravitational field effects space-time, causing it to bend and warp, and it's the light traveling along the curved path that produces the effects. If space-time curvature was ultimately the cause of any star displacement, the redshift would specifically match relativity theory's prediction during the 1919 eclipse or any subsequent observations of Venus throughout the year. No space-time redshift has ever been demonstrated or observed in these observations that would easily establish cause and effect relationship for light being displaced by space-time curvature. Once again, they actually just completely deny the true verifiable causal mechanism of electromagnetism. I did make an update to the photon traveling of light. Nice. Oh, good. You're seeing a reoccurring theme here. Everything's electromagnetic. They ignore it, hijack the effects, and then call it space-time to safe heliocentrism. That's why his first paper itself was literally about electrodynamics on moving bodies. It was all about Maxwell's equations. He had to hijack all the effects of electromagnetism. Okay. And then limit them as if Einstein was some arbiter of truth and was truly a genius that could tell us the limit of electricity and magnetism when he didn't even know what they were. Have to be super low and slimy to bring kids into the conversation, leave the babies out of it? Moral degenerate. All right. Electromagnetic retardation. Even with no motion, the light is still spectrum shifted due to the wavelengths being retarded from the magnetic field. If we live in a giant magnetic field, you could never distinguish between relativistic effects and electromagnetic effects. There would be a Zeeman effect intrinsically when we looked at the sky, possibly even the Stark effect depending on the apparatus used. The idea of we see redshift, therefore everything is moving away from us, is perpetrated by the expanding of nothing or space-time fabric, which is a contradictory reified oxymoron, as the physical mechanism to explain why they see a spectrum shift. This is, of course, in reference to Hubble's cosmological redshift interpretation. To explain away why we appear to be at the center of a magnetic vortex emanating over a plane, and to preserve adherence to the Copernican principle framework of interpretation, men have hypothesized that everything is expanding away from us in all directions, overlooking the natural electromagnetic phenomena to engage in their own fantasies. This is so well put. Space audits crushed it. That is the truth. You want to invoke all this nonsense, but you can't even address the real physical phenomena. Play the new theme song again. I can do that. I'm going to come over here and grab it real fast.
Relatively speaking, first day after the weekend. Relatively speaking, first day after the weekend. Mickelson Morley, it showed that the earth they don't move, huh? What they do, shorten the length of the ruler. Hey, that's just how they fooled y'all. Tune in Wednesdays, bet that we gon' school y'all. Mickelson Morley, it showed no displacement. Nicholson, Gale, Pearson, it measured rotation. Let's break it down in layman. That means the Earth is stationed. No planets and spaceships, they're all animations. Relatively speaking. First day after the weekend. Relatively speaking. speaking. First day after the weekend.
Such a banger. All right, I think... Okay, we got one more thing to cover. I told you it's information heavy. I want to try to change the vibe of the show because it's just so much. I know a lot of people are appreciative of it, but it's just so much, man. It's so much. Like, we're going to have some people call in, maybe try to argue specifically heliocentrism, kind of introduce like an end segment where we just talk about gravy, and we may just move over to Rokfin, talk about like some of the stuff going on in clown world that we can't talk about here. We may finish the shows over on Rokfin. So I think I'm going to keep the presentations more concise, not just so like, oh, my brain is melting. Have some call-ins, specifically defend heliocentrism, and then shoot over to Rokfin for half an hour and have like an exclusive familiar chat there. I think that might be the new format. We'll still keep it where we cover the science of heliocentrism, geocentrism, but much more concise, not so overwhelming, and maybe you could say dry, I think. In a world. Etheric Productions. I was waiting. I don't know how long it takes.
Hardhitter50 donated $99.99 through Super Chat. Did you see the FDA approved human trials on the N link? Mark of TB? Being portrayed as something could cure diseases, make crippled walk, heard Musk say it could make blind see, creepy. Only person.
What? I got you, bro. I'll have to see if there's some type of limit on it. What the crap? And it's cut off. I got you. They're not gonna get us 1200. Boom. Not today. Okay. Did you see the FDA approved human trials on the Neuralink Mark of the Beast? Question mark. Being portrayed as something good, cure diseases, make crippled walk. Heard Musk say it could even make blind see. Creepy. Sound familiar. Only person to ever do that stuff was Yeshua. It's like he's trying to play God or Yah. Thank you for the very generous donation, brother. Hard hitter 50. Very generous donation, bro. I did see the FDA approved NDA for human or Neuralink for human trials. Yeah, it's very interesting. Some of the stuff I want to say about that, I don't think I can even say here, but yeah, it's like he's claimed to be able to do everything that Yeshua could do, even though he did say, you can do greater things than I can. You can do everything I've done and greater things, and you can heal people as well. Obviously didn't mean in the sense of taking over someone's brain with some type of like synthetic, mechanical technology. From some dude who wears a Baphomet Halloween costume. So yeah, that's very crazy. Is it the mark of the beast? Maybe. That's so incredibly dangerously close to it that anyone that would ever partake in it is entirely void of wisdom and discernment. Yeah, that sounds exactly like the mark of the beast. It'll be too good to be true. People will take it. It'll tell you that you won't age, that you can have telepathic communication, you can instantly control your phone with your mind, you can search instantly, you can communicate all over the world with multiple people at the same time. Yeah, it'll be sold under the fact that we need to compete with AI, and our processing capability or how long it takes us to communicate our information holds us back. It's crazy. It's definitely crazy. Yeah. And, you know, people are going to virtue signal just like the last 3 years. Like, you don't want people to walk again. You don't want people to have bionic arms. You don't want people that are blind to be able to see again, or you don't want them to be cured of cancer. You don't want people to not die anymore. Like, you know, that's just how it's going to go. You got a shout out on tinfoil hat today from Hibbler. Time to capitalize and get on there, bro. Eddie, bravo, podcast too. Thank you for the $5 super chat. Yeah, Hibbler called me and told me that he did that. Very cool. Shout out to Sean. And yeah, I'll jump on there. If they want to have me on there, obviously I'll jump on there. And I'm much more of like let people reach out to me kind of guy. You know. So. I think I missed a couple baller super chats. Oh, you're not on the screen. I don't know what to say. I will read them off later. Okay. We're gonna cover one more thing. We're gonna watch a video here to explain it. It's so information heavy. It's almost already been 2 hours. I'll just have to briefly cover it. It's just a lot. It's a lot. Hopefully you guys learned some stuff about time dilation so far. Time itself can't physically widen and dilate, thus slow down. That's ridiculous. It's a concept and physical properties. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the person that came up with the idea said that it was ridiculous. So Einstein just stole that, just like he stole length contraction. Literally everything needed to save the heliocentric model was proposed by Einstein in the form of plagiarism. And baselessly, you know, removing any physical mechanism whatsoever. Weird. All right. Let's come over here and watch the video. And to give you a reminder of what I'm talking about real fast. Time and space is not nature which imposes them upon us. It is we who impose them upon nature because we find them convenient. Like, I'll meet you tomorrow at 8. Henri Poincaré. Probably saying it wrong, I know. All right. Here we go.
Every second, thousands.
Just to give you an intro here, this is what they claim the best evidence for time dilation is, because at the higher levels, they actually know the atomic clocks isn't evidence for time dilation, that Ron Hatch had to come fix it because Einsteinian synchronization doesn't work at all for the atomic clocks on the quote-unquote satellites for GPS. And in fact, of course, all that actually is you know, even if there were satellites, which most of them are satelloons, but say that there are satellites, right? I have no problem with that. They clearly follow like this flower of life ellipse, you know, perpetual motion within the toroid, and they seemingly would use angular momentum in the vortex to do that. And their equations that they use specifically account for a Earth-centered Earth fixed, meaning stationary Earth, and the real centrifugal force, the real Coriolis force. So a real set of inertial forces is if the Earth is stationary and the actual cosmos is moving around it. Of course, if it was the Earth, you wouldn't have these real forces. You wouldn't have inertial forces. They'd be fictitious, much less up above the Earth. Where do you get this real Coriolis, or this fictitious Coriolis that you treat like a real force? So even if the stats are real, it's actually only evidence towards a stationary Earth, which is hilarious. And yeah, that being intrinsically tied to magnetism, to have any type of perpetual, realistic, physically viable explanation for that, of course, they would potentially be affected by time dilation, quote unquote, when in reality, that doesn't exist, but you're using clocks that use magnetism and microwave, which is intrinsic electromagnetic, to look at the cesium oscillation, thus affected by the altitude within the magnetic field, which is entirely avoided and excluded in all explanations ever of the atomic clocks, which shows you that this is not about science, it's a religion. How can you not even like address something that you know would play a role and would be the most relevant and strongest variable? Anyway, this is what they've moved to since none of that really works. And now we get muon. Okay, so let's check out what the official little story here is. How do you know that? We don't know where they come from, but we do know that they're coming and hitting other particles in the atmosphere. Okay. You're saying no audio? Oh my goodness. Oh, I know why. Sorry. I'm super sorry. We got this. All right. Make sure there's no echo. Let me know if you guys hear the sound. I get it. Hey, I don't think there's any sound. Okay. Over here. I know I'm delayed. I get it. I accidentally muted the desktop. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. It'll work now. Hopefully it doesn't have an echo. This is the mainstream explanation of muons, muon decay. I kind of covered it last week. It's the idea that cosmic rays come down and hit particles in the atmosphere, which make a whole bunch of subatomic particles that are all made up anyway. And one of them is the muon, which is like the bumpy, more heavy cousin of the electron. And that happens around 50,000 feet, even though it happens everywhere and we're not sure exactly where it happens and we can't really get reliable measurements of it. But we'll get into all of it. I'm going to bury it. But, yeah. Anyway. And by the way, join my Telegram, t.me/WitsitStreams, and I'll drop all the information in there. I'll drop all the PDFs. I'll drop all the information showing the discrepancies with the muon measurements that you'll never hear from a mainstream relativity proponent. But here's the mainstream story so that we can pick it apart. It's important to inform yourself of the other side of any conversation that you're going to end up making a decision about. As I always say, you should be able to still man the other side. So the audio should work now. Let's play it.
Every second, thousands of cosmic rays, mostly hydrogen and helium nuclei, strike every square meter of the Earth's upper atmosphere. We don't really know where they come from, but we do know that when cosmic rays crash into air molecules in the atmosphere, they create a shower of other fundamental particles. Pions, kaons, positrons, electrons, neutrons, neutrinos, gamma and X-rays, and muons. We know this because...
I'm super confused. Time is abstract. What's it not a phenomenon? Didn't I already say that? Like, wasn't that like the first slide of my presentation? Brother. If you're late, don't like come in. Come on, bro. Like, I explained that time is merely an abstraction. It's a conceptual quantification of change in motion, specifically the motion in the sky. We quantify it linear, like a straight arrow out, for convenience purposes. I then quoted Henri Poincaré, the person that actually invented the geometry of space-time that Einstein stole, but then refuted his own theory an entire year before relativity ever came out, saying, and I quote, "It is not the universe that imposes space and time on us, but rather it is we who impose space and time on it out of convenience. Merely a conceptual abstraction. It cannot have physical properties. That's a reification fallacy." That's like the first 3 scenes of the presentation, and I've actually said it probably 5 times. So can we pay attention to the muon decay? Thank you. Much love, though.
Because we have particle detectors in labs down on the surface that detect the directions and energies of the particles in these showers, and use them to study the original cosmic rays. But there's something fascinating about the fact that we detect a lot of the muons from cosmic rays down on the surface of the Earth. Because muons, if you make them in a laboratory, only have a 1.5 microsecond half-life before they spontaneously decay into an electron or positive.
Of course, it's anything but what those who make all our useful stuff say. No one has to treat time as a physical, corporeal entity that can be physically manipulated and has physical properties to do anything at all. We literally covered the exact and precise mechanisms of atomic clocks in this show. So please stop the gaslighting. It's very remedial.
We know this because we have particle detectors in labs down on the surface that detect the directions and energies of the particles in these showers, and use them to study the original cosmic rays. But there's something fascinating about the fact that we detect a lot of the muons from cosmic rays down on the surface of the Earth. Because muons, if you make them in a laboratory, only have a 1.5 microsecond half-life before they spontaneously decay into an electron or positron and some neutrinos. And yeah, the Greek symbol mu is used for both muon and for microsecond, which can certainly be a little confusing. But the lifetime of muons is really close to a microsecond, so it's also kind of beautifully appropriate. Anyway, the point is that if you have a bunch of muons, you'll only be left with about 50% after 1.5 microseconds, and 25% after 3 microseconds, and after 10 microseconds there will only be 0.1% of the muons left. Muons don't live very long, just 2.2 microseconds on average. To put that time
Muons don't actually live. This is another reification fallacy, of course. They have a concept, right, they use to quantify energetic phenomena, which they can't even define energy. They say it's the ability to do work, which is stupid. Okay? But simply, I'll explain it so everyone makes sure they understand it. We're just going to play the whole video all the way through. I'm going to stop. It's only like it's 4 minutes long, so we're just going to play it through. This is the mainstream story, so we can cover it. I may pause to explain a couple things briefly, but for the most part, we're going to just let it play through, and then I'll answer your questions and explain it in a sec. I'm late. No worries, bro. It's all good. Just you see, we're getting bombarded by psychos right now, so I'll chill out. Let's go.
Every second, thousands of cosmic rays, mostly hydrogen and helium nuclei, strike every square meter of the Earth's upper atmosphere. We don't really know where they come from, but we do know that when cosmic rays crash into air molecules in the atmosphere, they create a shower of other fundamental particles. Pions, kaons, positrons, electrons, neutrons, neutrinos, gamma, and X-rays,
pseudoscientific tons,
and muons. We know this because we have particle detectors in labs down on the surface that detect the directions and energies of the particles in these showers, and use them to study the original cosmic rays. But there's something fascinating about the fact that we detect a lot of the muons from cosmic rays down on the surface of the Earth. Because muons, if you make them in a laboratory, only have a 1.5 microsecond half-life before they spontaneously decay into an electron or positron and some neutrinos. And yeah, the Greek symbol—
Sorry, so much of what he's saying is so stupid. Like, you don't make them in a laboratory, dude. Okay? Like, if energy cannot be created nor destroyed, you're not creating or making anything. Okay? You're simply transferring energy from the etheric background. If energy cannot be created nor destroyed, it can only be transferred. Where is that coming from? He means to say when they isolate a specific state of this equilibrium that they quantify and label a bunch of different particles. Okay, so I don't know where my mouse went. Oh, there it is.
Gamma and cosmic rays showers, and use them because muons, if you make those gamma and X-rays, and muons. We know this because we have particle detectors in labs down on the surface that detect the directions and energies of the particles in these showers, and use them to study the original cosmic rays. But there's something fascinating about the fact that we detect a lot of the muons from cosmic rays down on the surface of the Earth. Because muons, if you make them in a laboratory, only have a 1.5 microsecond half-life before they spontaneously decay into an electron or positron and some neutrinos. And yeah, the Greek symbol mu is used for both muon and for microsecond, which can certainly be a little confusing. But the lifetime of muons is really close to a microsecond, so it's also kind of beautifully appropriate. Anyway, the point is that if you have a bunch of muons, you'll only be left with about 50% after 1.5 microseconds, and 25% after 3 microseconds, and after 10 microseconds there will only be 0.1% of the muons left. Muons don't live very long, just 2.2 microseconds on average. To put that time into perspective, light travels fast enough that in 1 second it could go around the Earth 7 times, but in 2.2 microseconds, light will only travel 660 meters.
Charlie donated $50 through Super Chat. 25 of us gave $2.
Or less than half a mile. So even muons traveling at essentially the speed of light—
Oh, I was muted. Thank you for the generous Super Chat, Charlie. Much love. And To put that into real perspective, a microsecond is 1/1,000,000th of a second. 1/1,000,000th of a second. So sorry, I was muted. Just so everyone understands that. What if light doesn't travel? Of course it doesn't travel. Everything that they ever say requires like 50 different foundational presuppositions. But I want you to really understand what he's saying here. Oh, it has, when we make it in a lab, which we can't do that. That's ridiculous. But he's obviously just saying that, right? That's the problem with like layman pseudoscience. And when you're making a claim that you're building an entire worldview off of, it's very important. You don't just say things just to say it. Check out that $2 tips coming in. 26 and 27. Check them out. Again, a microsecond is 1/1,000,000th of a second. Okay, just keep that in mind.
Wouldn't make it more than a kilometer or two before the vast majority of them decayed, which is far less than the 10 or 20 or 30 kilometers that muons do regularly travel from the upper atmosphere to the ground. So how do muons travel dozens of kilometers through the atmosphere without spontaneously decaying, when in fact they should only be able to travel less than 1 kilometer? Time dilation. Yes, because the muons are traveling.
Okay. One of the red flags for me of an obvious shill is them begging you for money. No one's begging for money, but if you keep saying stuff like that, you're going to have to be hidden from the channel because you're distracting away and you're just being toxic. And notice, I want to say this, notice that every person that comes here to defend the mainstream globe model that's tilted, wobbling, spinning, revolving around the sun in an ever-expanding vacuum of nothingness where the distribution of energy is not homogeneous or isotropic like it's predicted, and supposedly space is expanding 4 times faster than the speed of light, and the redshift is actually not evenly distributed, and they can't even explain redshift within quasars, and they see redshift and blueshift in the same spot, and then there's actually a lack of locality with a 23.4 degree supposed tilt of the Earth, although it would have to be local, but it's seen further out into space, and that's actually the anisotropic or inhomogeneous section of the entire universe, just so happens to cut right through the Earth. And they say, oh, well, you can never actually say that the Earth is moving because basically it's not moving, and it's equally valid to say that it's not moving because the evidence showed that it's not moving and show that's in the center. So now it's just that everything looks like it's a center and there is no center, but everything expanded from a singular point in all directions, but there is no center. People that believe all that but don't even understand all that, so technically they don't even believe that because they don't know that's what they believe yet. All I'm saying is, the people that come in here to defend that, have you noticed all of them are the same? They're like, they attack, they bring up children, they accuse me of like being a grifter or a con man or a shill. They don't go to other YouTube channels that get donations for showing kitten videos or rerunning ISS live streams, right? But they come here when people choose to support a channel and they spam the chat. It's moral degeneracy, and I think it's beautiful to have them be around sometimes because people come and they see, wow, I do not want to be like those people. I do not want to be on that side of things. And it should be very eye-opening for you that the people that come here, they're all the same. They're all the same. So let's go back to the show.
Close to the speed of light, their time literally passes more slowly. At a speed of 99.5% the speed of light, 2.2 microseconds for them would be about 22 microseconds for us. Enough time for
22 millionths of a second. And when it says for them, it's as if you were in their perspective and their reference frame compared to our reference frame detecting them. Time slows down because they're going so close to the speed of light. Science. Time slows down. It's just conceptual and we could change it tomorrow, but it physically expands and slows down.
99.5% the speed of light, 2.2 microseconds for them would be about 22 microseconds for us. Enough time for the average muon to travel at least 6 kilometers before decaying, instead of half a kilometer. And even higher energy muons going even faster would even more easily reach our detectors on the Earth's surface before they decayed. At 99.995% the speed of light, the average muon would live for 220 microseconds and travel at least 66 kilometers before decaying. So from our perspective, the fact that so many cosmic ray muons reach our detectors on the Earth's surface is direct evidence for special relativity and time dilation. But what about from the muon's perspective?
Look how off the rails we got. I got to come over here already. Like, he starts by saying, we know that cosmic rays come and it hit particles in the atmosphere at a certain altitude. We don't know where they come from. Now, in reality, they don't know anything. So they've tried to send up high altitude balloons and measure these alleged muons, and they found out that there's way too many of them in places that there shouldn't be. But they should only be able to get here based on relativistic time dilation from about 50,000 feet up. You'll never hear this from the people that push muon. Okay, right? So they claim that the measurements show there's more of them as you go higher. But then it should stop, right? And it should start decreasing because they can't get here and they're coming from so much higher up. But they claim that the primary collision of the cosmic rays coming to the atmosphere happened around 50,000 feet. Now, if you look at the actual data, there's a huge divergence in data. It doesn't work. And I have the papers. I'll drop them in the Telegram. So he says, we don't know where it comes from. They reify the muon, which is supposedly a heavy electron, and we make them in a lab, which means actually they just isolate a transference of energy, right? And there's even energy in the vacuum, of course. Electromagnetic vacuum, Casimir effect, etc. And it's not like they're weighing these things. It's based on like their interaction with them, like how much impedance, how much it resists, any type of like physical alteration or measurement. Right. And they just made up a new name for a quote unquote new particle. Right. It's a little bit bigger than the electron, which they can never find. And it supposedly goes right close to the speed of light. And it lasts for like a microsecond, a millionth of a second. Like 1.5 microseconds. So like a millionth of a second. And then he says, if we assume that these happen, he doesn't say it like this, but if we assume this happens at 50,000 feet, even though all the data shows that's not the case, with our presupposed and reified particle, the muon granted to us, the data still doesn't show us that. Then we detect a lot of these presupposed and reified particles on the surface. That's direct evidence and proof of special relativity, and that time a concept physically changes and slows down. This is the sad state of affairs of modern academia and popularized science. All right, let's move on. Don't worry, I got more info for you on the muon thing. It's so bad, so stupid.
Where they do only live on average 2.2 microseconds. Well, for them, the answer to the apparent paradox is also relativistic length contraction. From the muon's perspective, it's the Earth and the atmosphere which are moving, at 99.995% the speed of light, towards the muon, and the lengths of moving objects are literally contracted by a factor dependent on their speed. In this case, 50 kilometers of our atmosphere is, to the muon, literally only half a kilometer, which is thin enough for even a muon with a lifetime of 2.2 microseconds to traverse. Well, actually, from this perspective, the atmosphere and ground move past the muon, but at a speed of 300 meters per microsecond and a distance of only 500 meters, the ground has no problem reaching the muon before the muon decays. This, in my mind, is one of the most awesome experimental verifications of special relativity.
Someone said they can't find the electron. No, they claim it's impossible to find it. So they use a math equation based on a cloud probability distribution, meaning they have a radius, a volume, and they say, here are the odds of this electron being at any given point at any time. And it can only be there once you observe it, but as soon as you do, you can't measure where it actually is. Right? That's 100 million times smaller than the atom, and that it has no size or shape that can be determined or even known if it has one. But it's a particle of matter because it has to be. So no, they can't detect electrons. They can isolate the phenomena misidentified as an electron for different technology. Yes, we use that for circuit boards and your phone and your computer, right? And it started with cathode ray tubes. But really, the electron came from what's the smallest unit of this electrical phenomena we can quantify, right? And that's what they called the electron. Why does it keep doing that?
simultaneously decaying, when in fact they should only be able to travel less than 1 kilometer? Time dilation. Yes, because the muons are traveling close to the speed of light, their time literally passes more slowly. At a speed of 99.5% the speed of light, 2.2 microseconds for them would be about 22 microseconds for us, would even more easily reach our detectors on the Earth's surface before they decayed. At 5% the speed of light, the average muon would live for 220 microseconds and travel at least 66 kilometers before decaying. So from our perspective, the fact that so many cosmic ray muons reach our detectors on the Earth's surface is direct evidence for special relativity and time dilation. But what about from the muons' perspective, where they do only live on average 2.2 microseconds? Well, for them, the answer to the apparent paradox is also relativistic length contraction. From the muons' perspective, it's the Earth and the atmosphere which are moving, at 99.995% the speed of light, towards the muon, and the lengths of moving objects are literally contracted by a factor dependent on their speed. In this case, 50 kilometers of our atmosphere is, to the muon, literally only half a kilometer, which is thin enough for even a muon with a lifetime of 2.2 microseconds to traverse. Well, actually, from this perspective, the atmosphere and ground move past the muon, but at a speed of 300 meters per microsecond and a distance of only 500 meters, the ground has no problem reaching the muon before the muon decays. This, in my mind, is one of the most awesome experimental verifications of special relativity. The unequivocal time dilation, or
When he says my mind, he means the mind that people have conditioned for him. Let me address some of the stuff in the chat. Van Gogh had nothing on these artists who paint by numbers and end up with pieces so beyond anything we experience in reality. True that. Gordzilla, thank you for the super chat. Okay. Well, charge is measured, so yeah. They claim that the electron is a particle of matter that carries charge. Like Santa carries a bag. That's right. They use the verb carry. So a charge-carrying particle of matter that has no size or shape that can be determined, and we don't even know if it has a size or shape. A charge-carrying particle of matter that has no size or shape. Matter with no size or shape. Okay. Yes, they have a certain area. It's called a cloud. That's the terminology they use. And they have a cloud probability distribution equation, meaning within this cloud or area, there is set amount of odds that the electron can be at any given point. And they mathematically come up with an equation to determine the probability that it could be in one of those places within this certain volume. Measuring charge within that volume doesn't prove the electron. Okay? In fact, the electron is nothing more than the terminal end of one unit line of dielectric induction. Okay? It's basically a gap in the field. So, there you go. Hopefully that explains it. We're going to go back to the video.
Length contraction, depending on your perspective, for objects moving close to the speed of light. They literally couldn't get here if it weren't for time dilation. The specific time dilation and length contraction factors I talked about can be calculated using the time dilation and length contraction formulas. Once you know how to use them, you can plug in any speed you want and see how much distances and time intervals will be distorted. And Brilliant.org, this video's sponsor, is a great place to learn about not just the
Hey, where did those come from? Where did these equations come from? Oh, that's right. Michelson-Morley showed that the Earth wasn't moving. So, Michelson-Morley showed that the Earth don't move, huh? What they do? Shorten the length of the ruler. Okay. That's where length contraction came from. Lorentz tried to save the model from the difficulty by proposing that the apparatus contracted just a sufficient amount to compensate for the missing time difference would be exceedingly small but clearly detectable via interferometry from Michelson and Morley, and their test should have been clearly decisive. That's almost quoting Einstein verbatim. He's then taking this length contraction. That's where they got the math. They didn't make any direct observation of anything. They just said it had to contract this much to explain away the results. There was a time difference, but you can't tell because the apparatus contracted just the right amount, just a sufficient amount to compensate or make up for the missing time difference. Okay. Einstein took that and said, we see that from the standpoint of relativity also, that was the correct answer to Michelson-Morley. But we have a different interpretation, and it's that you can't detect it. It doesn't shorten for your coordinate system. And he specifically says coordinate system, as in you can't measure it with length, width, and height, a coordinate system, because that coordinate system is also in motion, thus contracting relative to the sun. Nothing is at rest in the universe, but nothing can be said to be in motion unless it's in relation to something else. That's what relativity says. That's where this value came from, was specifically, literally, length contraction equation came from the amount needed to explain Michelson-Morley. That's literally where the value came from.
Time intervals will be distorting the Schrödinger equation of quantum mechanics, and one on Hubble's law in astronomy, and the famous equations, and not
in the world. Okay, now, I think, oh yeah, okay. So, let me explain some stuff to you. First of all, how do they supposedly detect the muons on the Earth? I have a few PDFs. I'll have to find them, but unfortunately, I restarted my computer before I started, so I don't have them pulled up. But let's see if I can find it. It's one article. Real fast. I don't see it. Real fast. I'll drop it all in the Telegram. There'll be tons of papers and articles there. The actual evidence. What I'm saying. So anyway, they have a few different ways, right? And they're really funny, dude. Okay. So there was a really archaic version of how they did this. And it just reacts to charged particles. Meaning if there's charge in it, it emanates light. And then this is supposedly how they used to detect muons, and they say it was discovered like in the 30s, I think, or something. Anyway, so all of them are basically the same thing, with different methods, right? But they react to charged particles, quote unquote. The charge, that's what they react to, and they emanate light usually. So it's like, well, how do you know it's a muon? First of all, how do you even know what a muon is and that it exists, and if it's only there for just a second and then it changes state? Is it possible that it's just a moment in quote unquote time that is in a certain state as it's shifting into another energetic state because everything's etheric and just in different modalities? No, that's way too logical and makes sense and actually doesn't require pseudoscientific contradiction. So let's assume the muon's like a real thing. How do you determine with these muon detectors that you're getting a muon? Well, they say, oh, well, based on their decay products, meaning that the muon can decay into like an electron and a positron. Mind you, these are the things they can't even fully define in 2023. Can't actually detect or find. Say it's a particle of matter, doesn't have a size or shape. Positron is the opposite form of it, whatever that means. Okay? Not a proton, a positron. And these muons, the heavy cousin, right? The heavy, awkward cousin of the electron. You can tell it was a muon because of its decay product, meaning when it decays and it breaks down, right? It turns into certain things, and that's an electron, positron, or neutrinos. Okay. The amount of pseudoscience is insane. People claim this is evidence for special relativity and that time a concept physically changes and slows down. They have a mechanism that detects muons. What it does is it reacts to charge and it emanates light. They say, oh, well, they know it was a muon. It was a charged particle called a muon, right? Because, for one, the way they interact within that environment based on their velocity compared to an electron, since they're heavier than the electron, they're going to go on a straighter path. So we kind of this is me still manning their position, I promise. This is not a straw man. You won't hear any of the people that run around the internet talk about muon decay actually know any of this, though, because they don't research anything. They watch that video and repeat it, okay? Or something like that. Anyway, they claim that one of the muon is heavier than the electron. So when it goes through this mechanism, it's like a little box, that it's going to go in more of a straight path. Right? Because it's heavier. So it's going to go straighter. It's going to be less affected by the medium within the mechanism. Okay. But it's really hard to tell if it's actually going straight, or you could actually have electrons go through it and they could still go straight, and it's hard to tell. But they just use some equations and try to get close and use some averages, and then they combine it with the amount of light it gives off. And they say that they can distinguish between it based on the illumination, although sometimes different charged particles give off more light that would far exceed the amount we're claiming to isolate with the alleged muon. Okay, so it's the straight path and then the amount of light. And then it's the decay product, meaning, oh, well, now we see this light from the charged particle, but now we see an electron or a positron or a neutrino. Now think about this. An electron charged particle can cause the interaction that... Now this is within their pseudoscience of like making up particles. The truth is, there are different etheric modalities and energetic expressions, geometric expressions of energy, specifically loss of dielectricity, but play their particle game, it's still ridiculous, okay? In their own paradigm, the electron is a charged particle that can cause the interaction within the device, the mechanism that allegedly detects the muon. And they say they know based on the decay what it is. But then one of the decay products that show you it's a muon is an electron or a positron, which is the opposite form of the electron, which comes based on certain interactions with the alleged electron. This is the core of it, okay? How do they know it happens at 50,000 feet? They don't. When they sent up satellites to determine it and high altitude balloons, but there are discrepancies. I went and found the articles. They said we're in desperate need of more precise technology, technological advancements, better theoretical frameworks to interpret it. We used all of the mainstream theories in the top level textbooks. This is a university, and I'll drop it in my Telegram. And they're like, it didn't work. It didn't match the prediction. We had way too much here, way too little here. We can never get the right number over here at different altitudes and different locations. It changes with locations. Shouldn't though. Shouldn't change. So they just basically claim it. The reason that they get to 50,000 feet, they did not go up there and measure, oh, there's way more muons here at 50,000 feet that are being created here. That's not what happened. That's like using their time dilation excuse. That's as high up as they can explain them being and still reaching the Earth in their own paradigm. So they say it happens there. Then they turn around using circular logic, affirming the consequent and begging the question, flooded with reification fallacies. That's not word salad. That's an accurate depiction of what this is. It's a bunch of fallacies. Okay. They turn around and invoke that very 50,000 foot altitude that they determined, assuming the muon was making it down to the surface because of time dilation. They used that math reverse engineer to get to 50,000 feet altitude. Then say, based on the fact that they're created at 50,000 feet altitude, that's how we know that time is slowing down for them, or relative to us. They're experiencing time slower from our perspective, right? Because they make it all the way to the Earth and they shouldn't make it nearly that far. That's actually what happens. This is an actual stillman of their argument. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Okay? And so that's like the fundamental flaws with it right there. But And you can't get out of that. You can't. But it's even worse than that. Say this phenomenon is real. Mind you, I told you, the only time length contractions actually been observed in reality, not indirect observations, which is a fancy way of saying if I presuppose my theory and my claim. That's what that means. Okay? Pretend that all this was real. The only length contraction that's ever actually been detected was, again, electric. Wires will contract relative to electric current in certain conditions. Oliver Heaviside, early 1800s. Okay. That's where they got the idea that Lorentz then took to try to build upon baselessly to save the heliocentric model and the ether together. Because he's like, I can't even imagine explaining electrical field theory without the ether. Einstein took it, threw out the ether, didn't offer a physical mechanism. It's disputed to this day, by the way, what the physical mechanism for length contraction and time dilation. It's not even agreed on. That's why you have people running around saying it's just apparent based on how you view it from a different reference frame, not understanding they're claiming a real physical effect of things getting physically shorter and time physically expanding and dilating and physically slowing down. It's not just about perception. It's not just apparent. Just saying the word reference frame means you don't understand relativity. Yes, it's all relative to reference frame because of the physical interaction of the fabric of space and time, and there's no agreed upon mechanism. At the highest levels of academia, it's still debated what the actual physical mechanism for length contraction and time dilation is. 2023, not even a proposed mechanism, dude. And that's not me just saying they need a mechanism. They know that there has to be a mechanism, and they don't know what it is. Okay. They took the contraction, built upon it, threw out the ether once Lorentz saved it. Einstein took it, no mechanism, but the math was needed to fix the mathematical discrepancy, the exceedingly small difference in time that should have been expected, even though it's exceedingly small difference in the two light beams, right? It should have been detected because they came up with a clearly decisive method based on interferometry. Again, basically quoting Einstein. All that to say hypothetically that this muon thing was real. It's not. It's completely flooded in pseudoscience. It's absolutely ridiculous. Can't even get through it. It's so much pseudoscience. Pretend it's real. Look how easy it is for me to rebut it. Look at this.
2 microseconds.
A higher rate of induction causes a greater disturbance, thus a greater perceived distance. Oh, that's word salad. No. What people call the speed of light, or these particles traveling at a speed close to the speed of light, is actually nothing more than a rate of induction. That's it. It's induction into the background medium. It has a certain rate. We quantified that. When it comes to light specifically, we call that C in a vacuum. Rate of induction, people call it the speed of light. Sure, rate is a speed, but not of travel. Okay, it's just being induced into the background at a specific rate. That causes illumination. So the quote-unquote speed of light is actually just a rate of induction and a quantification of the perceived rate of illumination. This goes for all of the energetic phenomena that's hijacked, specifically all electric, and really more accurately, electromagnetic when properly defined. So you have the rate of induction. That happens because of a disturbance. That's what light is. That's what all of this is. It's a background medium being disturbed. The greater the disturbance, right? Because you have a higher rate of induction. Really, it's the greater disturbance, the higher the rate of induction. Thus, a greater perceived distance. Now, think about it. If you have a lake, okay? Say you have a lake, and you throw a little pebble in it, and you watch how far the waves go. Now, there aren't waves. You can't reach and grab a wave out of the water. It's the water moving. You throw a pebble in there, the waves go so far, right? Ripple out, they go so far. Now, throw a cinder block in there really fast. Okay? The waves are going to go further. Right? Or take the same size rock, just barely toss it in there, and then just chunk it in there at an angle. Right? The disturbance is greater. Right? So then you're going to see that disturbance. It's going to be observed further. Okay, so a higher rate of induction due to a greater disturbance. Well, A higher rate of induction causes a greater disturbance, thus a greater perceived distance. And more accurately phrased probably is a greater disturbance causes a higher rate of induction, thus a greater perceived distance. That's not word salad. I'm sitting here explaining it. Okay? Just like sound. I'm talking right now. Sound waves are not being emitted from my mouth. That's ridiculous. That's very dumb. That's not what happens. Okay? My vocal cords are vibrating. All right? I'm creating a vibration in the air, a disturbance, a perturbation. And as I create this disturbance in the air and it vibrates, it creates sounds, audible frequency based on the disturbance of the air. So if there's someone way down the street and I yell and it takes a second to hear them, or it takes a second for them to hear me, the light does not take a second to travel down the street because what's actually causing the sound? The air. How do we know this? Because without air, you don't have sounds. It's actually the sound. There are no sound waves. It's the air waving, because waving is a verb. Can you give me any scenario where you can hand me a wave by itself?
Alleged Machinist Bear donated $19.99 through Super Chat. Hate to change the subject but wanted to share that my wife just gave birth to baby number 5 in our living room. That makes 7 flat earthers / bears living under one roof. Life is awesome. Keep
crushing. Yeah, bless. I gotta figure out what cuts it off. Hey, everyone, take a moment. Welcome in the new legend from Alleged Machinist Bear. 7 true earther bears. What a legend. Hey. Oh, number 5. Oh, 5 plus you 2. 5 true earther bear legends. Coming from 2 true earther bear legends. I'm happy for you, brother. Congratulations. I think another one of my friends gave birth today. Nice. Or actually at 3:33 a.m. But anyway, congratulations, brother, man. I'm so happy for you. I got to catch up. 5 to 7. 5 to 7's the goal, bro. Anyway, congratulations. Much love to you and your familia, and I'm sure your wife was a legend. Very cool. That's how you really win. Make some babies. Okay, so you can't hand me a wave of anything. I can wave my sheet. I can wave a towel. I can throw a rock in the water and the water starts waving. I can wave my hand. I can't hand you a wave. It requires my hand, the sheet, the towel, the water. Wave is a verb. It's an action. It's a type of movement. Waving. Okay? It's not a noun. It's not a thing. Okay? When we talk, we create a perturbation in the air. Right? The greater the disturbance, the further away you can hear me. Not because something physically travels to you. That's ridiculous. The reason that it takes a second is because the disturbance takes a second to be detected. The actual thing that's moving, the actual sound itself, is the air. That's what it is. It's the motion of the air, right? So it didn't take the air a second to get to you down the street. There was already air there. It didn't take a second for the lake to get to the water to get to the other side of the lake. The water was already on the other side of the lake. It just took a second for that motion to get to where we look like it's getting to the other side of the lake, because there's just motion there now, but the water was already there. Okay. Same thing with sound. Same thing with light. Same thing with these quote unquote energetic particles. So, in theory, if you had a greater disturbance, okay, and you would then actually have a greater perceived distance. So even if what they're saying is true, it's not. I mean, it's not in any way substantiated. It's flooded in pseudoscientific nonsense from the very detection method, from the actual base assumption of circular logic that it happens at 50,000 feet altitude based on assuming time dilation. That's the only way they could get here. But in truth, in reality, these come from the background medium. So there's no way that's true. Ex-astronaut Don Pettit is literally on Trolling Tribune. You got to be trolling. Can someone verify that's actually real? No way. I'll go over there if it's real, but I can't even imagine that being real. It's the real Don Pettit? No way. Let's see if that's true. Because I will go over there.
The Southern Crux issue, we
showed that the base of the mountain was below the water.
Okay. It's not, I don't believe that at all. It's the voice changer or something. It's not even, he's not on camera. Got Brenda over there. You're completely trolling me. My goodness. He has the same voice. Yeah, voice changer, man. Hello, man. Actually, no, a flat earther that can, like, perfectly imitate his voice. All right. Anyway, you guys get it. And I'll drop all the papers where the discrepancies. You'll never find the actual methods they used. What's wrong with them? So, in conclusion, because this was a really long stream, and I did not really want it to be, but it's a lot of information. Yeah, the only reason that you have time dilation at all is because they needed to shorten the length. Therefore, if you keep speed the same but change the distance, you have to change time. There was no evidence, no experiment. It was a desperate philosophical decision. They had to keep the Copernican principle, so they had to make up a new paradigm of physics. You keep speed the same, you change the distance, then you have to change time. They had to keep speed the same and claim it was absolute in all reference frames, that there's no absolute reference frame other than speed's just absolute itself for all observers. They had to claim that in special relativity to try to explain away Michelson-Morley. So you keep speed the same, you have to change the distance. That means you have to change time. Period. That's where it came from. Einstein was not some genius that discovered this intellectually. It was based upon needing to explain away Michelson-Morley. Lorentz did the math and said, I can't explain this. This makes no sense to me. I think that this is stupid, but the only way to explain it would be that this apparatus contracted this much. Here's the equation, so we know how much it would have had to shorten. There must be something shortening it and making it look like it didn't have to go a greater distance. And Einstein took that math, which is what the Lorentz transform to this day is. It's used to constantly save relativity and just make things relativistic when the evidence flies in its face. And it's such a clown world. People take the transform, apply it, and then say, this is evidence for relativity. When in fact, the Lorentz transformation is actually a tool to make the evidence that doesn't fit relativity try to work with relativity by begging an unfalsifiable question that voids even an articulatable physical mechanism. I know that was a lot. This whole stream has been a lot. Sorry. Hopefully, I do think I'm going to probably change the format, but there you go. All right. Thank you guys for kicking it. I'm tired now. No, it was a lot. I know we had a lot going on there, but hopefully you guys enjoy. There's a lot of information there. Maybe break it up, but hopefully you kind of understand. These are some of the main things you get thrown at you. It's all pseudoscience. It's just philosophical nonsense to try to desperately cling on to this religion that never had legs founded or to stand upon in the first place, right? Math describes, science explains. People being scared of there being a creator doesn't somehow make time physical. So you cannot attribute physical properties to conceptual abstractions, one of which is a privation, that is space, the absence of, like shadow, the absence of light, nothingness. These are privations. Space is also privation. It's the absence of material. Stuff is in space, right? Space itself is merely a conceptual coordinate system of length, width, height. It's how we describe things with the descriptors of dimensionality. It's merely a concept of emptiness and descriptive math, basically. So pretty simple. And then time is the same thing. It's how we quantify the motion of the sky and change. And we see people die and we see things happen over time. So we call it that. We make it linear, even though what we use to actually quantify it isn't linear. It's actually going in a circle. So you can't attribute physical properties to conceptual abstractions. It is not the universe that imposes space and time on us, but rather it is we who impose space and time on it out of convenience. The despair in which the heliocentric model found itself in required them to attribute physical properties to this. Even Tesla told you, I know for a fact relativity can't be correct for many reasons, but the simplest of which is space cannot curve because it can't have physical properties. So, basic stuff. Doesn't sound like Don Pat to me. Yeah, who knows? All right. I love you guys. Thanks for kicking it. Been a long time. Hopefully you guys enjoy the new intro. Trying to work on a new one for Wednesday. I mean, maybe not this Wednesday, but for the Skull and Glober show, we're going to come up with another new intro. But I just spit that pretty quick, and I think it's pretty cool. Nicholson Morley. I think it's dope. I think it's a banger. And it took me a while to make that lyric video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We're going to change the format of the show a little bit. Not just so much me just like bamming you over the head with like high level information that's like, oh, am I in a lecture at university? We'll make it more entertaining where we have people call in. We cover a certain subject kind of briefly and concisely, have people call in, try to defend the heliocentric model. Maybe integrate some different things of gravy at the end of the episodes, and we may go to Rokfin to do it so we can talk unimpeded. Okay, cool. So you may want to go to rokfin.com/WitsitGetsIt to go ahead and get out ahead of that, but who knows? I know that we will be integrating that here in the future. I want to not just talk about flat Earth all the time. You know, the fact that some people are like really mad about it and can't see it doesn't mean anything to me. I do feel that I'm supposed to talk about it a lot and help a lot of people out. And I just, unfortunately, I have that role where like I talk about it a lot. It's because I feel like I have to, and someone has to do it. So yeah, but we're gonna cover a bunch of other stuff as well. Slay wizards, you know, break spells, not just about the Earth. So I do think we're on the brink of some crazy stuff happening, like that someone said. I did get mentioned on Triple show. He came out as a true earther. Bunch of cool stuff on the horizon, which is clearly an apparent location, and that's where the word horizontal comes from. All right, I love you guys. If you want to support the channel, links in the description. You can go to Witsit.live. I have some new things to announce to you guys Wednesday. That's really cool. We have a dope guest coming on Thursday, and then I'm still working on Friday. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. You can go to auditnasa.com as well. If you want to support Audit NASA, that's pay.auditnasa.com or $auditnasa. Of course, I have my links in the description. All right, cool. Thank you guys for kicking. If you want to see all the evidence supporting anything that I said in the stream tonight, go to t.me/WitsitStreams. When I get a chance, after I get away from these lights for a second, I'll drop a whole bunch of PDFs and information in there for you, and I'll drop the presentation as well. All right. I love you guys. Seek and speak truth unequivocally. The weak find contentment in the consensus of ignorance. And when they revile you for his name's sake or the truth's sake, rejoice, for they did it to all the prophets before you. What's popular is not true, and what's true is rarely popular. So just stand up for the truth is, regardless. And history will reflect that you were doing what's right, and just kind of expect that, you know, the weak are going to come together and attack you, mob mentality. Just how it works. All right. Show love to each other. Be kind. Be patient. I'll catch up with you guys Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. Skull and the Globers. Peace.
Relatively speaking, first day after the weekend. Relatively speaking, first day after the weekend. Mickelson Morley, it showed that the earth they don't move, huh? What they do, shorten the length of the ruler. Hey, that's just how they fooled y'all. Tune in Wednesdays, bet that we gon' school y'all. Mickelson Morley, it showed no displacement. Nicholson, Gale, Pearson. It measure rotation. Let's break it down in layman. That means the Earth is station. No planets and spaceships. They're all animations. Relatively speaking. First day after the weekend. Relatively speaking. First day after the weekend.